Chapter 468. On August 10th, it rained moderately in Lin. The dense rain sprinkled all over the city, and the scenery of the whole West Lake became more and more charming. The lonely boat on the West Lake was still drifting aimlessly. The person on the boat was still fishing. This picture seemed to have become a part of the West Lake. Day and night, it seemed to be an eternal scenery. The person watching the scenery was still watching the scenery. The scenery was not boring. He was not tired of watching it either. The private room on the Mingyue Tower was still elegant. He sat in front of the window with a pale face, looking out, silent like a statue. The lonely boat in the center of the lake was far and near, near and far. Time passed slowly. The sky was still gloomy, and the rain was getting heavier. He quietly looked at the lonely boat drifting with the wind and rain on the lake. The hazy scenery of the whole West Lake seemed to be far away from him. In his eyes, there was only the dark night on the lonely boat. The night was like a curtain, deep and obscure. A ray of light lit up in the almost extreme darkness. It was like the first ray of light that illuminated the world at dawn. His pupils contracted slightly, and he narrowed his eyes and laughed. The whole elegant private room seemed to have merged with him. As his chuckle spread, the whole private room became extremely cold and empty. The phone suddenly rang. He casually took the phone on the table, glanced at it, and answered it. A somewhat embarrassed face appeared on the screen of the phone, with some undisguised annoyance. He looked down at the phone screen and did not speak. "Your Majesty." The voice of the person on the other end of the phone was hoarse, and he seemed to be a little embarrassed. "I didn't find Jiang Qiansong." On the other end of the phone was Mellad, the second commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps of the Vatican, and also the first follower of His Majesty. His Majesty looked at him quietly. "Why?" "I was entangled by the master of Samsara Palace for a while. When I arrived at the address Your Majesty gave me, they should have entered the secret base of the Jiang family of South America. I looked around for a few days, but I didn't find a suitable opportunity." The follower looked ashamed. He knew very well what an important position Jiang Qiansong played in His Majesty's plan. He was the second commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps of the Vatican, and he followed Holy Virgin Angel to Reki City. Jiang Qiansong almost ran away under his nose, but he did not stop him. This was equivalent to directly destroying a very important chess piece of His Majesty. The disciple lowered his head and said in a low voice, "I'm useless." His Majesty nodded and said, "Oh, are you sure you met the master of Samsara Palace?" he asked. The follower hesitated slightly. Before he could speak, His Majesty had already said indifferently, "Don't think about it. If it was really the master of Samsara Palace, you wouldn't have the chance to stand here and talk to me. It's my incompetence." The disciple repeated his words. His Majesty was silent for a while and looked at the lonely boat in the distance. After a long time, he said calmly, "It doesn't matter. Since you can't get the chips of the Jiang family of South America, your task in the Vatican will be heavier. I will try my best to create an opportunity for you to control the Holy Disarmament Corps. Wait for my news." Control the Holy Disarmament Corps? The disciple was stunned for a moment. What about ours? He was the second commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps. And the commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps was Arsis. Among the few experts at the peak of the invincible realm in the Dark World, Arsis was not very powerful in his normal state. But after the coronation, Arsis was almost no weaker than anyone. He could be said to be the biggest deterrent force the Vatican had placed in Eastern Europe. As long as he was there, the follower could only be the second commander. Nothing. His Majesty's tone was a little cold. "If he dies, you will naturally become the new commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps." The follower looked at His Majesty on the screen of the mobile phone, and there was a flash of fiery excitement in his eyes. The matter of the Jiang family of South America can be put aside. Next, keep an eye on Angel. His Majesty said and hung up the phone directly. There was a knock on the door almost at the same time as the phone was hung up. A figure pushed the door open and walked in, calm and composed. "Secretary Wang, sit down." His Majesty smiled and reached out to invite Wang Qinglei, who was still staying in Lin, to sit down. he asked. How many days before the meeting? Wang Qinglei had been attending the high-profile Southeast Conference in Lin, and in recent days. Shortly after the end of the Yuzhou Conference, under Wang Qinglei's proposal, the high-level officials of Wuxia, Jianghuai, Xianxia, and Minnan provinces met frequently and finally decided to establish the Economic Circle of the Four Provinces, which was the Southeast Conference held in Lin and today. There was no doubt that after the end of the Yuzhou Conference, the Southeast group was dissatisfied with the Li family's comeback. Once the Economic Circle of the Four Provinces was established, the four provinces would be more closely connected. At that time, all the pressure would be on the Li family, which had just gained a foothold in Xianxia. It will end tomorrow. Wang Qinglei poured himself a cup of tea and said casually. His Majesty said thoughtfully, what can I do for you? Wang Qinglei asked directly, you and I have special identities. If there are no special circumstances, I think it's better to meet less, especially in such a sensitive situation. Of course. His Majesty chuckled. You and I have been friends for nearly 10 years. You should know me. If it's not important, I won't meet you rashly. Wang Qinglei twitched the corner of his mouth and smiled. His Majesty took out a large but old file bag from his side. He handed the file bag to Wang Qinglei and said softly, I hope this thing can appear in front of Xianming as soon as possible. What do you mean? Wang Qinglei frowned subconsciously. He knew this thing. If he was right, it should be an X-ray film of some years. Wang Qinglei didn't know what it meant to appear in front of the person in charge of intelligence of the Wang family of Beihai. Eastern Europe has now entered a stalemate again. I think His Majesty the Sword Emperor is also in a dilemma. But the stalemate is not good for anyone. My thing may help the Sword Emperor make up his mind. His Majesty said with a smile. Wang Qinglei took the X-ray film in his hand, raised his eyes, and said, May I have a look? His Majesty's tone was calm. Wang Qinglei took out the X-ray film and looked at it for a long time. The light in the room was a little dim, and he didn't know martial arts or medicine, so he couldn't see what this X-ray film meant at all. I don't understand. Wang Qinglei looked at His Majesty and said, You don't need to understand. Wang Tianzong will understand. His Majesty said in a calm tone. Wang Qinglei took a deep look at him, put the X-ray film back into the bag, and said slowly, You have been paying attention to Eastern Europe, but you don't go there. If your plan can be implemented, what will be the final result of the chaos in Eastern Europe? There was silence in the box. His Majesty didn't seem to know how to answer. After a long time, he said calmly, This is a big problem. What will happen to Tianzong? Wang Qinglei straightforwardly asked the question he was most concerned about. His Majesty gave him a strange look, thought for a moment, and said, It depends on the final result. If Li Tianlan dies, he dies. If Li Tianlan lives, he lives. Wang Qinglei looked at His Majesty quietly, waiting for his explanation. Li Tianlan is very strong. If he eventually grows up, I can't think of any other candidate who can balance him except Wang Tianzong. But everything has its priority. At least in the chaos in Eastern Europe, my main goal is Qin Weibai. Only when she dies can I be free. After Qin Weibai, it's Li Tianlan's turn. If Li Tianlan dies, it's the best thing. But if he can live, I can only put this matter aside. If Li Tianlan lives, his rise will be unstoppable, so Wang Tianzong must also live. Wang Qinglei narrowed his eyes and digested the information His Majesty had said. If Li Tianlan grows up, even you are no match for him? No. His Majesty said calmly, My state is similar to his, but it's completely different. But he goes faster than me. In the end, it's hard for me to be his match. What about Tianzong? Wang Qinglei asked. He will break through. At present, the chaos in Eastern Europe is the only opportunity for him to break through. But even if he breaks through, he is not absolutely invincible. At least the Samsara Palace has the power to balance Wang Tianzong. So the best result is that Qin Weibai, Li Tianlan, and Wang Tianzong all die. If this becomes a reality, the whole world will be our country. Qin Weibai is indeed very important. Wang Qinglei nodded thoughtfully. But I remember you once said that you didn't seem to have won the game with her. That's not the point. His Majesty said lightly, life is like a game of chess, but it's not a real chess game. A temporary victory or defeat is not important. What matters is that I have to win in the most critical game. She is in the light and I am in the dark. I know almost all her chess pieces, but she doesn't know who I am. I can even push Wang Tianzong to break the deadlock in Eastern Europe. Does Qin Weibai want to win? Wang Qinglei didn't speak. He just slowly tapped his fingers on the file bag in front of him with X-rays. Secretary Wang, please. His Majesty turned to look at him, and his voice was very sincere. Wang Qinglei smiled and said, before tonight, this thing will appear in front of Xianming, and before tomorrow morning, it will arrive in Eastern Europe. He stood up with the file bag. That's good. His Majesty nodded and picked up the teacup in front of him. Wang Qinglei glanced at him and left the private room without a word. His Majesty quietly sipped the tea and looked at the lake in the distance. On the lake in the distance, the lonely boat gradually drifted over, with a dark and pure sword intent. The wisps of light in the darkness had begun to disappear, and it became quiet again. His Majesty looked down at his watch. It was close to noon. He picked up the menu and began to order. Lunch was not simple. It was so sumptuous that it could almost be called a dinner party. The entire kitchen of Mingyue Tower began to become busy with His Majesty's order. His Majesty took out a bottle of fine Huadiao wine from the corner and prepared 2 wine glasses. After everything was done, he looked at his watch again. There was a knock on the door quietly. The person outside the door did not push the door open and waited quietly. His Majesty smiled, got up, and took the initiative to open the door. An old man, who was neatly dressed but a little hunched, stood outside the door of the box. He looked at His Majesty's face with a strange look in his eyes. His Majesty looked at him and said with a chuckle, Boss Li, you're here. How wonderful. In the whole dark world, there was only one person who deserved His Majesty to call seniorly, Li Honghe. You're welcome. Li Honghe shook his head and walked into the box. The kitchen had begun to serve. Delicious dishes with good color, smell, and taste were served one after another. His Majesty opened the bottle of Huadiao wine. The fragrance of wine filled the air. Li Honghe quietly looked at His Majesty, who was very active, and suddenly said, I don't know you. Or you. Why did you ask me to come here? The 3 questions were straightforward and to the point. His Majesty smiled. Outside the window, the gloomy light sprinkled in and shone on his face. It was a somewhat stiff but extremely ordinary face. I've admired Senior Li for a long time. I propose a toast to you. His Majesty's voice was calm, and he picked up the wine glass. Li Honghe looked down at the wine in the glass, picked it up and drank it up. His Majesty drank the wine in the glass without hesitation and looked at Li Honghe. His smile was strong, but his eyes were a little cold. Good wine. Li Honghe put down the glass and poured another glass. The wine with glazed stars and blue flowers is, of course, good wine. His Majesty said with a chuckle. There were many kinds of poisons in this world. Some were very toxic. Some of them were extremely toxic. Glazed stars and blue flowers were completely out of the category of highly toxic. They were really deadly poisons. The combination of the 2 could easily kill anyone. Li Honghe glanced at him. Are you afraid? His Majesty's eyes were cold. I had a brother. His name is Yu Donglai. Li Honghe said quietly. I know, the famous poison doctor. But he's not with you. How can he save you? His Majesty sneered. Don't get me wrong. Poison doctor is my brother, and I naturally have the ability to distinguish poisons. If this glass of wine is really poisoned, I won't drink it. And how precious are glazed stars and blue flowers? They are all legendary things. How can you waste them on me, a dying man who is no longer in the invincible realm? His expression was calm and composed, without the slightest change. His Majesty looked at Li Honghe coldly. After a long time, he suddenly laughed. The serene blue flower and the glazed star are indeed legendary things. Elder Li is really experienced and knowledgeable. Let alone using these things to poison Elder Li, I haven't even seen these things before. Li Honghe's face remained unchanged, as calm as still water. I wonder if Senior Li can show me the legendary deadly poisons? His Majesty suddenly said. Blue flowers and glazed stars. I haven't heard of these things in recent years. I'm afraid they are extinct. How can I have them? I'm afraid I'll disappoint you. Li Honghe said. I'm not disappointed. His Majesty said with a smile, no matter how deadly the blue flowers and glazed stars are, they are dead things after all. But I heard that the Li family raised a bird in those days. What I want to see today is actually that bird, Senior Li. Li Honghe said expressionlessly, I don't know what you're talking about. Glazed stars are extremely hot. They generally live in volcanic environments. They can be called peerless fire poison. Blue flowers are extremely cold. They come from glaciers and are extremely insidious. I heard that back then, the Li family collected 2 kinds of strange poisons for the poison doctor. In order to fuse them together, you used countless resources to cultivate a bird with a special biological structure. The bird was named Linnet, and it could perfectly fuse the poison of extreme heat and the poison of extreme cold. His Majesty looked at Li Honghe softly and said, Senior Li, what I want is that bird. Li Honghe lowered his head to eat and said lightly, I don't know what you're talking about. Why are you so stingy, Senior Li? I don't want that bird for nothing. I believe the reward can also satisfy you. His Majesty said with a sincere smile. Li Honghe glanced at him. What can you give me? His Majesty's eyes flashed and he said, I can, swish. As soon as he opened his mouth and his voice came out, Li Honghe suddenly raised his palm. The fine wine in the glass rose in the air as if it was slashed in the face, sharp as a sword. Li Honghe pounced on the mysterious Majesty without hesitation and grabbed his face directly with one hand. Chapter 469. There was a sudden change. Everything happened so suddenly that no one was prepared for it at all. His Majesty's voice was still echoing in the air. The sharp sword-like wine and Li Honghe's palm had already arrived in front of His Majesty. His Majesty narrowed his eyes and took a step back. Without any time to think, he directly punched Li Honghe's palm. Bang! There was a muffled sound in the private room. The sword intent collided with the power. The wine mixed with sword intent swept through the entire private room, looking extremely dazzling. Li Honghe's body shook slightly, and his face turned pale. The wine that was splashed by him seemed to be endless. Countless water droplets flew in all directions and bounced off the walls. The entire private room was filled with shining sword light in an instant. His Majesty snorted and waved his fist again. It was midsummer, but the temperature in the entire private room suddenly became cold. The gradually louder sound of the rain, the noise of the West Lake tourists, and the music of the bright moon tower. Everything disappeared completely. The water droplets shining with sword energy began to dim. Everything around him became cold and empty in silence. All that was left in Li Honghe's sight was the simple punch. The slow but powerful punch seemed to overturn the whole West Lake. His Majesty took a step forward. His face was expressionless, but his entire body exuded an almost invincible aura. Li Honghe was familiar with this feeling. This was the momentum that belonged to the peak of the invincible realm, majestic and vast. The water droplets shining with sword light gathered wildly and rushed toward His Majesty's fist. The iron fist collided with the sword light for a moment. The sword light completely scattered, and light began to appear in the cold and dark private room. Li Honghe's body jerked back a few steps under the tremendous force. His Majesty, who was high above, flew directly up and hit the wall. A mouthful of blood completely dyed the wall red. He frowned slightly and looked at Li Honghe, his eyes cold and indifferent. Li Honghe looked thoughtfully at His Majesty, who fell to the ground in an extremely embarrassing manner. Li Honghe had now fallen from the invincible realm. His real strength was probably equivalent to that of a half-step invincible realm expert, and it was declining every day. His Majesty's realm was extremely high, but his combat capability was incredibly weak. Seriously speaking, the power he exerted was only equivalent to that of the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. This was enough to explain a lot of things. "Take off your mask." Li Honghe looked at His Majesty in front of him and said in a flat tone. His mask could almost be mistaken for the real thing. But the muscles on his face were extremely stiff. After careful observation, Li Honghe could easily confirm that the other party was talking to him with a mask. "You think you've got me?" His Majesty slowly stood up from the ground, wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and sneered. "You're in a special state. Do you dare to go all out?" Li Honghe said indifferently, "Your current state is somewhat similar to my grandson's." "Your grandson?" His Majesty sneered. Li Honghe looked into his eyes and said calmly, "Who on earth are you?" The other party's state was very special. To some extent, it was similar to Li Tianlan's, but also completely opposite. Li Tianlan's body was perfect, but his realm was not enough for the time being. The other party had a realm, but his body was extremely fragile. In a flash, Li Honghe could completely determine the other party's state. This so-called His Majesty had been seriously injured for an unknown period of time. Although his martial arts foundation had not been destroyed, it was already on the verge of collapse, which also led to a great reduction in the power of his attack. Otherwise, with the momentum shown by the other party, once his injury was healed, Li Honghe thought that even at his peak, it would be difficult for him to win against him. "Does it matter who I am?" His Majesty walked back to the table and sat down. The two fought in a flash. Although the sword energy and power did not overflow out of the window, the whole box was already in a mess. Of course, the dishes could not be eaten, but the wine could still be drunk. His Majesty poured himself a glass of wine, drank it up, and said calmly, "You must agree to my conditions." Li Honghe ignored his words and just asked, "Does it matter whether your life is important or not?" The meaning of this sentence was obvious. It was a naked threat. "If you don't tell me who you are, I'll kill you. If you force your hand, you will also die." His Majesty's voice became colder and colder. "It's worth it. I don't have much time left. Your existence makes me uneasy. Why can't I take you with me?" Li Honghe smiled. This meeting had been a little inexplicable. Li Honghe felt that something was wrong when he saw the so-called Majesty. It was a feeling that something was becoming out of control. Li Honghe didn't like this feeling. Although he was smiling, the killing intent in his eyes had gradually become obvious. A crippled life could eliminate a great threat. Was there anything more worthwhile than this? Indeed. His Majesty was silent for a while and chuckled. "You and I can go together. I heard that Senior Li left a few men of sacrifice after the collapse of the Li family. They used the code names of the Big Dipper. Now they are all exposed. Why not? I've seen the cemetery of the Southeast Procuratorate. It's really amazing. But how many of those tombstones are empty graves? Why not check it? Why not investigate the relationship between the Purgatory of Heaven Capital and Senior Li? Oh, by the way, and Li Tianlan, his parents?" "Enough," Li Honghe suddenly said. His voice was extremely stable, but his eyes became extremely deep. His Majesty turned to look at him and still made the same request. "I want cardinals. At least, I need 5 drops of cardinal's blood." Cardinal's blood was the most poisonous, the most cold, and the most hot. His Majesty stayed in Lin, and for so long for these drops of cardinal's blood. Li Honghe stared at His Majesty in front of him. He couldn't figure out what went wrong. The man opposite him seemed to know too much. "You know the Li family very well," he said slowly. "Not bad." His Majesty's smile was gentle. "But you know these things, but you don't say it. Can I understand that it's also in your interest to keep these things hidden?" Li Honghe asked seriously. "I don't deny that, but I know a lot of secrets. Exposing the Li family's secrets will have an impact on my whole plan. But you have to believe one thing. These effects are definitely not as important to me as cardinals." Li Honghe looked at him, as if to determine whether his words were true or not. "Who are you going to kill with cardinal's blood?" Li Honghe asked. "It can help me recover from my injury, but it's not for killing." His Majesty said slowly. Li Honghe was silent. Obviously, His Majesty had a realm but no strength because of his injury. If he could recover from his injury, he would do it at all costs. I can also say a lot of things about the Li family. These can be secrets, or they can be made public. The difference is those drops of cardinal's blood. His Majesty said again. You know the Li family very well. Li Honghe repeated it again. It's often your enemy who knows you best, isn't it? His Majesty looked at Li Honghe and said with a smile. Enemy? Li Honghe raised his eyebrows. The Li family owes me. His Majesty took out another big bag from the corner of the box and threw it to Li Honghe. This was what he had just given Wang Qinglei. They were all X-rays. One would appear in front of Wang Tianzong tomorrow at the latest. And the other one was now given to Li Honghe by him. The two X-rays were exactly the same. Li Honghe knew poison doctor, so he knew medicine. Because of this, when he saw the hologram, his expression changed drastically. Chapter 470. It was still raining in Eastern Europe. The rain, which had lasted for several days and nights, raged through the whole city with the wind. The rain was overwhelming, messy, dense, and blank and desolate. There was no clear change of seasons in Eastern Europe. The cool summer had passed, the rainy season was over, and the whole of Eastern Europe was about to enter the cold winter. Therefore, the atmosphere of the whole Wulan state seemed to become depressed and cold with the cold wind and rain. The great change of the Rekvia family directly tilted the position of the whole Wulan state to Zhongzhou state unconditionally. For several days, Prime Minister Riker, who was temporarily the president of Wulan state, had issued rigorous, sincere, and apologetic apologies to Zhongzhou state, and severely condemned the despicable and insidious Jiang family of South America. All the statements were distributed through the diplomatic department of Wulan state. They not only resounded throughout the country, but also announced to the world. With Wulan state's clear statement, Oga state and Ra state also announced that the previous dispute was all a misunderstanding. The two countries were willing to take full responsibility for the dispute and give Zhongzhou state adequate compensation. For a while, it seemed that the apology of the three Eastern European countries was echoing all over the world. The international image of Zhongzhou state was completely reversed in the fastest time. When people around the world believed that Zhongzhou state was innocent, the world's major powers, which had exerted great pressure on Zhongzhou state at the United Nations meeting and even made clear threats, all kept silent awkwardly. Every powerful country knew what the truth was, and they could see the humiliation of Wulan state, Oga state, and Ra state from the statements. But in the game at the national level, the truth was often the least valuable thing. Only the outcome could determine everything. Zhongzhou state won, so it naturally had the qualification to write the facts. Snow Country, the only hegemon country in Eastern Europe, once asked Zhongzhou state to withdraw from Eastern Europe at the United Nations meeting. Otherwise, it would bring war to Zhongzhou state, was the most embarrassed. On the first day of Wulan state's apology statement, the president of Snow Country, who was known for his toughness in the world, had called Zhongzhou state and expressed his intention to visit Zhongzhou state in the near future through the embassy. It was clear that he wanted to apologize. After all, the chaos in Eastern Europe happened in Eastern Europe. As the hegemon of Eastern Europe, Snow Country had to consider the attitude of Zhongzhou state, the hegemon of the world, when it could not expel Zhongzhou state from Eastern Europe. Although other countries were not as obvious as Snow Country, they also expressed their apologies to Zhongzhou state through different channels. The specific way in which these apologies were presented was for the benefit of the country. The change in Wulan state caused by Li Tianlan continued to set off aftershocks in an awkward and weird atmosphere. However, the major forces in the dark world had reacted as soon as possible and poured into Wulan state. On August 8th, the chairman of the board of directors of the American Hero International Group came to Eastern Europe to inspect the investment environment in Eastern Europe and determine the investment direction in the shortest time. The Hero Group believed that with Wulan state as the center, the nearby 5 countries, including Oga state and Ross, were the most valuable places for investment. The Hero Group dominated America and was the absolute giant in the whole of America. In the dark world, the Hero Group had another name: American Heroes Guild. The chairman of the board of directors of the Hero Group was the president of the Heroes Club, who was ranked on the divine list and was very close to the peak of the invincible realm. With the Heroes Club statement, on the morning of August 9th, the Eastern Church, the largest religious organization in Eastern Europe, issued a statement at the same time. Patriarch Calendar, one of the 4 patriarchs of the Eastern Church, was about to visit Wulan State and bring the glory of God to this war-torn country. On the night of August 9th, Kasrater, the god of war of Star State, officially issued a statement that the terrorist Pluto, who had been wanted by Star State for nearly 10 years and had caused great losses to Star State, had sneaked into Wulan State. Kasrater hoped that Wulan State could provide convenience. The men in black would immediately enter Wulan State, and at the same time, they would do their best to protect the stability of Wulan State and stop terrorist activities. At the same moment, Fantasy World, a superpower in North America, responded to Kasrater's call and expressed its willingness to cooperate with the men in black's actions in Wulan State. On the morning of August 10th, Arsis, the commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps of the Vatican, came to Reki City. The Holy Disarmament Corps and the Holy Punishment Priest group were mighty. Angel, the Holy Virgin of the Vatican, who had been walking with the Snowdance Corps, left the Snowdance Corps and re-entered the Vatican's team. On the same night, the Holy Disarmament Corps, known as the strongest combat force of the Vatican, was attacked. Black Knight, the leader of the Dark Knights of Northern Europe, personally took action and killed 15 Holy Disarmament warriors. He left before Arsis could take action and escaped unscathed. After several superpowers, more and more small and medium-sized organizations in the Dark World began to enter Reki City. On August 11th, in Reki City, there was a storm, lightning flashing, and thunder rumbling. The sky seemed to be always gloomy, and the humidity in the air was constantly increasing. The rainy season in Wulan State had passed halfway, and the gradually cold air swept over from the polar region in the distance. Even in Reki City, which was not affected by the polar sun and the polar night, the day seemed to be dyed with a layer of twilight. The whole city looked cold and restless in the surging undercurrent. In just a few days, the whole Reki City was in a turbulent situation. The major forces frequently made appointments with the high-level officials of Wulan State and influential figures of authority in an almost ostentatious manner. All their actions seemed to be undisguised. The Snowdance Corps had been silent. The reason was simple. Since the battle on August 7th, Li Tianlan had been in a coma. It was normal for him to be in a coma after being seriously injured. But Li Tianlan was in a coma at the wrong time. Zhongzhou State had taken down Wulan State, but Li Tianlan did not have time to suppress all the variables, which was tantamount to giving other superpowers a chance. Although the chance was very small. Although Zhongzhou State had an absolute advantage. But if they entered Wulan State at this time, there was still a possibility of turning the situation around. Wulan State was too important. This was the most important place in the whole of Europe that military experts had to fight for. Controlling this place was tantamount to controlling an important lifeline of Eastern and Western Europe. The benefits it meant could completely support the rapid rise of a super-powerful family. No one was willing to give up this place. Now that there was a chance, almost everyone flocked to it. Most importantly, the Shadow Throne was also moving. The intelligence of the Dark World had always been extremely timely. Everyone knew that the elites of the Shadow Throne had begun to enter Reki City. The Shadow Throne had never concealed this news. Similarly, everyone knew that the Shadow Throne was cooperating with the Wang family of Beihai. The Snowdance Corps now represented Zhongzhou State in Eastern Europe. But who dared to say that the Wang family of Beihai could not represent Zhongzhou State? Who dared to say that the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State could not represent the Wang family of Beihai? As a close ally of the Wang family of Beihai, the Shadow Throne was moving, which at least showed that the Shadow Throne had never given up Wulan State. It also showed that the Sword Emperor was not satisfied with the fact that the Snowdance Corps dominated Wulan State. The Sword Emperor and Zhongzhou State wanted Wulan State. But the Sword Emperor did not like the Snowdance Corps to get Wulan State. Once some of these grievances were deeply thought about, it was enough for all the superpowers to find countless opportunities. Although the Sword Emperor was powerful, before the dust settled, Who would think that they would lose? Just like the failure of the Jiang family of South America, 3 invincible realm experts and nearly 1,000 elites were killed by Li Tianlan out of the feast in Eastern Europe. The example of the weak defeating the strong happened every year in the Dark World. Therefore, when Li Tianlan was still in a coma and Wang Tianzong was silent, all the superpowers were trying their best to establish their own foundation in Reki City. Wang Tianzong seemed to have seen it, but he seemed not to have seen it. He had never expressed any opinion about it, nor had he targeted any force. No one knew what Wang Tianzong was thinking. As the superpowers entered Wulan State one after another, although the current situation in Wulan State was stable, the actions of the superpowers gradually brought some variables to the stable situation. Although it was impossible for the superpowers to completely destroy everything that Zhongzhou State had in Wulan State in the shortest time, in the long run, it would make people uncomfortable. Moreover, the superpowers that could dominate the Dark World had countless resources behind them. If they were allowed to go on like this, who knew what they would do? More and more doubts began to gather inside the high-level officials of Zhongzhou State. At noon on August 12th, when General Anderson, the Minister of Defense of Reki City, was assassinated in his office, the news came out, and Zhongzhou State finally turned its inner doubts into substantive actions. President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou State personally held a video conference with Wang Tianzong. Li Huaqing was alone. Wang Tianzong was also alone. Separated by a screen, the 2 men, who had reached the peak in their respective fields, were unusually silent. "What's the matter?" Wang Tianzong glanced at Li Huaqing and asked calmly. His tone was flat, but Li Huaqing was keenly aware that there was an extremely bad emotion brewing in Wang Tianzong's eyes. Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes and said blandly, "How much do you know about the situation in Reki City?" "I don't." Wang Tianzong responded straightforwardly. His tone was tough. "I've been in a bad mood these days. Has the situation changed?" There seemed to be a rage brewing in Li Huaqing's heart, but it was hidden. In the history of Zhongzhou State in recent decades, he was indeed not a very strong president, but this did not mean that he was incompetent. He was the president of Zhongzhou State. Who in Zhongzhou State would be so casual when they saw him? Wang Tianzong. Only Wang Tianzong. The current situation hasn't changed much. Li Huaqing slowed down his tone. But if you keep silent, it's not necessarily the case. The Shadow Throne has entered Reki City. You know what that means. What does it mean? Wang Tianzong asked. He was sitting in the living room of the hotel. It was raining outside the window, and the sky was gloomy. There was no light in the living room. The dim light fell on him, and he looked a little gloomy. Your cooperation with Rothschild is not a secret. The Shadow Throne entered Wulan City in a high-profile manner, which is tantamount to announcing to the world that you don't support Marshal Li Tianlan's action in Wulan State. This is almost a public announcement of your disagreement with Tianlan. That's why the superpowers are so rampant after entering Reki City. Don't you understand this? Li Huaqing's face was serious and dignified. His question was extremely powerful, with heavy pressure, shaking the entire call screen. Wang Tianzong glanced at him. I don't get along with Li Tianlan? Are you comparing him with me? What makes him? Li Huaqing became completely serious and said, he is now the Marshal of Zhongzhou State Snowdance Corps. From this position, only he has public office and can represent Zhongzhou State in Eastern Europe. Why can't he compare with you? Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and nodded. It makes sense. But there are some things that don't need to be publicized. Even if I do something, the whole Dark World knows that Li Tianlan and I do not get along. Li Huaqing frowned. At this time, you and Tianlan are both in Zhongzhou State, surrounded by enemies. Our internal conflicts can be solved by ourselves behind closed doors. We are outside, but we can't unite against foreign enemies. Tianzong, isn't this a joke? Li Huaqing said in a deep voice. Wang Tianzong was indifferent and said blandly, tell me about your arrangement. On behalf of Zhongzhou State, I now formally ask you to let the Shadow Throne leave Reki City immediately. This is the only requirement. Li Huaqing said in a deep voice. The Shadow Throne's high-profile entry into Reki City had caused a scene of demons dancing in Reki City. If the Shadow Throne left Reki City, it also meant that Wang Tianzong did not welcome the Shadow Throne. It was already very polite to send them out in advance. If the people who stayed here did not leave, they were likely to face the sword edge of listen to the sea. When the news came out, Li Huaqing had every reason to believe that most of the forces gathered in Wulan State at this time would leave in disgrace. Even if the remaining forces were superpowers, they would not dare to act in the open. Wang Tianzong said, "Let's talk about it later." "Comrade Wang Tianzong, I'm not discussing with you. This is an order. Beihai is a part of Zhongzhou State. I am the president of Zhongzhou State. At the critical moment, I can order Beihai and you. Wulan State must return to stability. This is related to the interests of the entire Zhongzhou State in Eastern Europe. It is not a battlefield for you to settle your grievances. The Wulan State is lost. How will you come back?" "How did you get back?" Wang Tianzong looked at Li Huaqing quietly. Li Huaqing's voice was very loud, piercing through the screen and causing a buzz. When all the voices stopped, Wang Tianzong said faintly, "Are you done? Don't you have anything to say?" Li Huaqing's tone was cold. "You're too noisy," Wang Tianzong said and hung up the communication directly. He stood up and looked out the window. The rain outside the window was messy and violent. The wind and rain howled, as if there was no end to it. Wang Tianzong's eyes were calm and focused, and he looked extremely focused. "If I let go, everything in the world will be gone," he muttered to himself, took a deep breath, and finally shook his head. There was a knock on the door. The door was pushed open. King Tong, who looked dignified and noble in a splendid dress, came in. She happened to see Wang Tianzong shaking his head slightly. She was stunned and asked subconsciously, "What's wrong?" "Nothing." Wang Tianzong suddenly asked, "How many people from the Shadow Throne have arrived?" King Tong felt a little strange, but she still told the truth. "There are 20 experts above the Thundershocking realm, 2 of whom are in the half-step invincible realm and 6 at the peak of the Thundershocking realm. The fire-flaming realm troops are still being mobilized. At present, there are more than 100 people." Wang Tianzong glanced at King Tong. In the chaos of Eastern Europe, the role of experts at the peak of the Thundershocking realm and even a half-step invincible realm was infinitely reduced. But Eastern Europe gathered the general trend of the entire Dark World. This was the battlefield of the invincible realm, the battlefield of the invincible realm on the divine list, and the battlefield of the peak of the invincible realm. It was even the battlefield of the chosen one. But how could the Dark World have a general trend at any time? Under normal circumstances, experts at the peak of the Thundershocking realm were already the power that could decide most of the situations in the Dark World. There were not many such people in any force. The Shadow Throne had mobilized so many people in such a short time. If they were the first to break the situation, the price that King Tong was going to pay for her comeback this time was indeed great. "What's your plan?" King Tong raised her eyebrows and asked. "I'm thinking that the elites of the Shadow Throne might go to the office of the president," Wang Tianzong said thoughtfully. King Tong's enchanting body shook. She looked up at Wang Tianzong and asked, "Are you crazy?" Wang Tianzong didn't say anything. King Tong's face was cloudy and uncertain. Finally, she couldn't help but ask, "Why?" The Shadow Throne entered Reki City in a strong and high-profile manner, so it attracted all the superpowers. Now the Shadow Throne was going to the office of the president. The first batch of more than 600 elites of the Snowdance Corps was stationed in the office of the president. The second batch of 2,000 elites was stationed near the office of the president. Li Tianlan was in a coma in the office of the president. The Shadow Throne going to the office of the president stimulated not only the nerves of the Snowdance Corps but also the nerves of Zhongzhou State. Wang Tianzong didn't say anything. "What on earth do you want?" King Tong stared at Wang Tianzong's side face. Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and said slowly, "Pressure." "Pressure? Only enough pressure can make me break through. I want the situation to be completely out of control and bring me enough pressure. Maybe that's the opportunity for me to break through." Wang Tianzong said softly. "If..." King Tong hesitated for a moment and finally couldn't help asking, "What if you don't succeed?" Once the situation was completely out of control and Wang Tianzong didn't succeed in breaking through, it would mean that Zhongzhou State would lose Wulan State and even the Arctic Ocean Command. The foundation of Zhongzhou State in Eastern Europe for more than 20 years would be completely destroyed, and the experts of Zhongzhou State would suffer heavy casualties. King Tong didn't dare to think about what the crime was. Then let go. Wang Tianzong laughed. His smile was very relaxed, but King Tong clearly felt that something heavy was slowly emerging in his eyes, which almost suffocated her. Let go? Let go of what? Actually, it's nothing. The current situation in Eastern Europe is a deadlock for me, but isn't it the same for other forces? It's just that I have a lot of choices. But at this point, Zhongzhou State is the only winner. For those forces, if they want to break the deadlock, they have to break the interests of Zhongzhou State. They have only one choice, and when they make this choice, they have to defeat me. So I simply make the situation completely chaotic. Wang Tianzong said with a smile, if the situation is out of control, people in the world will attack Zhongzhou State together. If the situation is not out of control, people in the world will attack the Wang family of Beihai together. If you were me, what would you choose? Do you want Zhongzhou State to bear the pressure with the Wang family of Beihai? King Tong asked. I'm the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Tianzong said, and I don't want Zhongzhou State to bear the pressure with me. It's just that I don't want to be divided with Zhongzhou State first. Zhongzhou State should stand with me and face the attack of the Dark World at the same time. Li Tanlan did take down Wulan State, but so what? The most important thing is to get it and keep it. As soon as King Tong spoke, there was a sudden knock on the door. It was extremely urgent. Wang Tianzong glanced at the door and said calmly, "Come in." A figure that surprised him appeared at the door. He was the head of intelligence of the Wang family of Beihai. Xianming. The surprise in Wang Tianzong's eyes flashed away. What's the matter? Xianming's expression was solemn, but there was no inconceivable fear. He had seen the same thing twice. For him, it was not strange no matter how strange it was. He held a big bag in his hand and said solemnly, "Your Majesty, there is something here. You may want to have a look." Wang Tianzong nodded. "Give it to me." Xianming handed over the bag in his hand. Wang Tianzong opened the bag and pulled out an X-ray from it. "I've verified the X-ray. It's not forged. It's absolutely real." Xianming took a deep breath. "This thing suddenly appeared on my desk, and I don't know its origin." Wang Tianzong did not speak. He had been completely attracted by the contents of the X-ray. The X-ray was just a part of a person's body. It looked like a chest. But it didn't matter. What was important was the dense, star-like scratches that were illuminated by the light film. How familiar was this scene? Wang Tianzong looked at this scene quietly, and his eyes became a little dazed. He had seen the X-ray of Qin Weibai when she was a child. The dense sword marks in it represented a similar but different sword stroke, including all phenomena. They kept spreading, crazily destroying Qin Weibai's human body functions. On this X-ray, there was also a sword stroke. This sword stroke was completely different from the one Wang Tianzong had seen before. The one he had seen before was the 6 paths of reincarnation. It was all-encompassing. But now this sword stroke was absolutely condensed. All the sword qi gathered from all directions, bringing with it an unparalleled penetrative power as it charged straight for the opponent's heart. This sword stroke was the 24 moves of sword break of reincarnation. And this sword stroke was somewhat similar to the one he had seen before. There were 2 sword strokes. Looking at the distribution of the sword energy, it could hurt people without killing them. This was a sword stroke that no one could do. This kind of precise control could not be shown by any martial arts realm at present. The peak of the invincible realm could not be shown. The half-step chosen one could not do it. After Wang Tianzong broke through, he couldn't do it. The 2 sword strokes seemed to be from the hands of ghosts and gods. Wang Tianzong knew the 6 paths of reincarnation. He could be sure that no one in the Wang family of Beihai could do that. That sword stroke fell on Qin Weibai. The murderer definitely did not belong to the Wang family of Beihai. But what did this sword stroke mean now? Who did this sword stroke come from? Who did it fall on? The most important thing was, Was the person who used this sword stroke still alive at that time? More importantly, if the person who used this sword stroke was still alive at that time, did he belong to the Li family? Chapter 471. Wang Tianzong thought a lot. However, he felt that his thoughts were not enough. Chaos often represents variables, represents confusion, and represents a lot of unexpected things. The situation in Eastern Europe could be said to be a big mess that the dark world had not seen in decades or even nearly 100 years. When the unfathomable muddy water became black water that no one could see through, it was not surprising that anything would happen. In such an environment, it was not enough to think too much. Wang Tianzong stared at the films in front of him seriously. The films were real. This also meant that such an injury and the sword that caused such an injury had indeed existed. It was very similar to the inexplicable 6 paths of reincarnation that had been left on Qin Weibai. For the person who attacked to cause such injuries, it was clear that they were torturing him. What did this mean? I suddenly remembered something. Wang Tianzong suddenly said. Xian Ming's face was dignified. The origin of this film was completely inexplicable. It appeared directly on his desk without any psychological preparation. When Xian Ming set off, he had already told his subordinates that the entire Mount Dibing was investigating the origin of this film. But now he had not received accurate news in Eastern Europe, which was enough to show that the person who sent this thing was extremely mysterious, and his means were extremely clever. The reason why he came to Eastern Europe as soon as he saw this film was that this film, combined with Qin Weibai's film, represented something. What Wang Tianzong wanted to say was exactly what he worried and even feared. King Tong glanced at Wang Tianzong and said nothing. She hadn't figured out what these things meant, so she didn't want to interrupt Wang Tianzong's thoughts. Wang Tianzong's fingers gently tapped on the film and said slowly, I also know the 24 moves of sword. Xian Ming paled for a moment. He kept silent. He knew exactly what that meant. In the past many years, in the era when the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai advanced and retreated together and dominated the dark world, the martial arts of the Wang family of Beihai, the Lin clan, and the Li family were all interconnected. Wang Tianzong, Lin Fengting, Li Guangtu, and Summer Solstice once learned swordsmanship together. In Wang Tianzong's father's generation, the most outstanding people of the 3 families also learned swordsmanship together. Wang Tianzong knew the 24 moves of sword. This also meant that Li Guangtu also knew the 6 paths of reincarnation. That was not the point. The real point was that the friendship between the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai was severed in Wang Tianzong's generation. Then, in their previous generation, the heads of the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai also knew the 24 moves of sword and the 6 paths of reincarnation. That was to say, the 24 moves of sword imprinted on this optical film might have come from an expert of the Wang family of Beihai. The 6 paths of reincarnation, which he had used to kill Qin Weibai, might have come from the Li family. The purpose of these 2 swords was to kill. How could there be so many abnormal masters in the dark world? Since there was a possibility that one of the top experts of the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai had 2 kinds of sword intent. In that case, could the 2 swords on the 2 holograms have been made by the same person? Wang Tianzong was sure that the man was not from the Wang family of Beihai. Then, only the Li family, which had been close to the Wang family of Beihai, and the Lin clan, which had been in seclusion, had these 2 sword intents at the same time. What made people speechless was that the Lin clan was now on the same side as the Li family. At least from the standpoint of the Wang family of Beihai, looking at the 2 X-rays, it made no difference whether the expert behind the scenes was from the Lin clan or the Li family. Your Majesty, could it be Li Honghe? Xian Ming suddenly asked. Few people in the dark world knew the 24 moves of sword. Few people in the dark world knew the 6 paths of reincarnation. There were even fewer people who understood 2 types of sword intents and could cultivate them to the pinnacle. This man was not from Beihai. The old patriarch of the Lin clan had been dead for many years. Li Honghe was the most likely candidate. Wang Tianzong glanced at him and said expressionlessly, How dare you call Senior Li's name? Xian Ming wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Finally, he lowered his head and said nothing. I know your doubts, but you must remember that some people may be our enemies, but even if they are our enemies, we can't smear them at will. In many cases, even enemies need to be respected. Wang Tianzong said blandly, Senior Li will inevitably hesitate in his life, but his life is upright and above board. Let's not talk about this film for the time being. Let's talk about Qin Weibai. If these two swords were made by the same person, Qin Weibai was still young at that time. Do you think Senior Li will torture and kill a child? Ridiculous. If he is really upright and above board in his life, what is going on with the purgatory of heaven capital today? King Tong suddenly asked. Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and shook his head. Everyone has the right to survive and change the status quo. Senior Li can't be so bored as to torture and kill a child. King Tong stopped talking. Your Majesty, does Senior Li have any brothers or something like that? Xian Ming suddenly asked. How do I know? Wang Tianzong asked in reply. He thought for a moment and continued, as far as I know, he doesn't. Play that film. Wang Tianzong suddenly said. Xian Ming nodded and made a phone call. In less than 5 minutes, the big screen in the living room lit up. On the other end of the phone was the reference room of the Wang family of Beihai. Several loyal archivists put the film in front of the screen, bowed, and left. In front of Wang Tianzong was the 24 moves of Sword of Unknown Origin. On the screen was the 6 paths of reincarnation that had been imprinted in every inch of Qin Weibai's bones and flesh. 2 films and 2 kinds of sword intents, like 2 storms, kept gathering and entangling in the depths of Wang Tianzong's mind. Wang Tianzong looked at them carefully for a long time. In the nervous eyes of King Tong and Xian Ming, he slowly closed his eyes. The Sword Emperor knew the 24 moves of sword. He also knew the 6 paths of reincarnation. 2 kinds of sword intents kept surging in his mind. They merged into one and then divided into 2. Sword light appeared in his mind. The sword light changed from fast to slow, and he simulated it repeatedly. After an unknown period of time, Wang Tianzong slowly opened his eyes. Do you think these 2 sword intents were made by one person or 2 people? Wang Tianzong suddenly asked. King Tong and Xian Ming looked at each other and thought, how could I know? I don't know either. Wang Tianzong said, I just simulated the strength of these 2 sword marks. He paused. That was what he was most confused about. Now he was only half a step away from the so-called chosen one. According to the sword marks left on the film, he could imagine the sword energy that could leave such sword marks and make people hurt but not die, so he could vaguely judge the realm of the other party. If these 2 sword marks were made by 2 people, the mysterious person who used the 24 moves of sword was undoubtedly weaker. His peak strength was probably at the peak of the invincible realm, and it was even possible for him to reach the peak. The other party's lethality was slightly weak, but his precise control made Wang Tianzong feel incredible. The sword stroke on Qin Weibai was really powerful. Not to mention the exquisite control, Wang Tianzong thought that he was no worse than himself now in terms of the strength of the sword intent. And what made Wang Tianzong speechless was that now he looked at the sword intent that killed Qin Weibai and repeatedly simulated it. Wang Tianzong increasingly felt that it was his own sword intent. The 6 paths of reincarnation was a unique skill. But the patriarch of each generation of the Wang family of Beihai had his own path. The 6 paths of reincarnation of each generation of the patriarch was different. The 6 paths of reincarnation on this film was slightly different from his own sword intent, but they were almost the same. Wang Tianzong felt that this sword stroke seemed to be made by himself. The point was that he had never done it. And he couldn't do it. Even after the breakthrough, he couldn't do it. Put it away. Wang Tianzong suddenly waved his hand. Xian Ming froze, turned off the screen on the wall, and looked at Wang Tianzong. Don't think about it if you can't figure it out. Wang Tianzong said. Xian Ming was silent. How could he not think about it? Whether these 2 films were of the same person or not, when this person was not from the Wang family of Beihai, he could be said to be an enemy. If the mysterious expert behind the scenes really came from the Li family, how terrifying was the Li family now? The remaining power of the Samsara Palace. The remaining power of the Li family. Sai City, Dongqing clan, and the mysterious expert behind the scenes. If the purgatory of heaven capital was counted, Your Majesty, Xian Ming couldn't help calling out. Wang Tianzong glanced at him. The opponent's lineup seems to be too strong. Xian Ming said in a low voice. Wang Tianzong pointed to the film on the table and said quietly, "The person who sent this film to you also wants me to think so." Xian Ming was stunned for a moment. Obviously, the other party is reminding me that the Li family is too strong now. Wang Tianzong said indifferently, rather than saying that the other party is kind, it's better to say that the other party is forcing me to take action first. He wants me to break the game. Xian Ming was silent. And is a strong lineup necessarily invincible? Wang Tianzong said, I know deity and Li Tianlan. Even if this expert's position is biased towards the Li family, so what? This is a good thing. Deity, Li Tianlan, and that expert, I think these three people will think that the Li family belongs to them. So who does the Li family belong to? Xian Ming's eyes lit up. Before he could speak, the gradually dimming screen in front of him suddenly flickered. Wang Tianzong glanced at the screen and narrowed his eyes. White light flashed on the huge screen. The white light slowly flowed on the screen and finally stopped. An old man appeared on the screen. He was dressed in a white robe, holding a scepter and smiling calmly. Xian Ming's face suddenly changed. King Tong had already exclaimed, "The Pope!" Wang Tianzong looked at the screen with no expression. The Pope on the screen was bathed in the sun. The bright light of the Holy Land appeared on the screen, looking particularly warm. Tianzong, you killed chaos. Shouldn't you give the Vatican an explanation? The Pope looked at Wang Tianzong for a while and suddenly laughed. His body moved slightly and he seemed to take a step forward. Xian Ming, whose face changed dramatically, couldn't help but take a few steps back. Just because the Pope took a step. This step was very small. But the Pope's body walked out of the screen in an instant and stood directly in the living room. The extreme darkness slowly spread in the living room like the wind, covering Xian Ming's perception. Wang Tianzong lowered his head and picked up the film that Xian Ming had packed. He said calmly, "Don't play tricks on me. What explanation do you want?" Chapter 472. His Majesty sat in the bright moon tower and watched the lake for a whole day. The rain in Lin and stopped. The lonely boat on the West Lake was still floating. That touch of night had not changed at all. On the lonely boat was a saint who was about to break through. The night did not change, and there was no hope for Saint to break through. His Majesty knew that he would have one less threat in the chaos of Eastern Europe. But he was not happy at all. It had been 2 days since Wang Qinglei left. The X-ray had been in Eastern Europe for nearly a day, but there had been no change in Eastern Europe, and nothing that shocked the Dark World had happened. When the X-ray entered Eastern Europe, it was like a stone sinking into the sea, as if it did not cause the slightest ripple in Wang Tianzong's heart. His Majesty did not know what went wrong. He also did not know that Qin Weibai, who was meticulous, would also leave an X-ray of that year. But he knew Wang Tianzong's courage and the Sword Emperor's caution very well. No matter what the Dark World's evaluation of Wang Tianzong was, from an objective point of view, Wang Tianzong was worthy of the words, great talent and bold vision, in his life. Such a person seemed to be born to stand at the peak of ambition. As one of the most outstanding patriarchs of the Wang family of Beihai in hundreds of years, Wang Tianzong was very decisive. It had been a day since the X-ray was sent. At least Wang Tianzong should have received the information that there might be a super expert behind the Li family. Whether this information was misleading or not, at least with Wang Tianzong's limitations, he could not see any problem. But Wang Tianzong did not make a move. This probably meant that Wang Tianzong would not make a move. His Majesty stood up calmly. The air conditioning in the box was on high, and the light was dim. In the dim light, his eyes were still calm. Although there was no excitement, there was not the slightest frustration or loss. There was a small bottle on the expensive sandalwood table in the box. Inside the expensive crystal bottle were a few drops of extremely dazzling liquid. Next to the crystal bottle was a thick folder. His Majesty stood at the table, staring at the folder in front of him, and hesitated for a long time. He remembered Li Honghe's reaction when he saw the X-ray. He said that the Li family owed him. When saying this, Li Honghe held the X-ray and did not speak for a long time. He finally turned and left. And when he was about to leave, he threw the optical disc back to her. The Li family doesn't owe you anything, because no one in the Li family can do this. These were Li Honghe's original words. The Li family did not owe them anything. His Majesty suddenly sneered. If you don't owe me, then who owes me? His eyes were cold and tranquil, like a glacier. He didn't care what Li Honghe had said. All he cared about was the result. As a result, on the night Li Honghe left, he got a few drops of cardinal blood that were crucial to his recovery. If he got the cardinal blood, he would keep his promise to protect the Li family's secrets, because it was also in line with his interests. However, it seemed that it was time to throw the folder in front of him. His Majesty thought for a moment, took out his mobile phone, and made a call. The video call's response was a little slow. After a full minute, the call was connected. The general of 9 Serenities in Zhongzhou State, Shang, codenamed White Tiger, picked up the phone. His aged face appeared on the small screen of the phone with the respectful expression. Your Majesty. His Majesty said, Wang Tianzong hasn't responded yet? Shang shook his head. I don't think he will do anything. His Majesty understood Wang Tianzong's decision. The whole dark world also understood Wang Tianzong's decision. His Majesty agreed with this statement. He nodded and said, It doesn't matter. The reason why Wang Tianzong didn't do anything is that some things are not important enough. Maybe he saw through your Majesty's mind. Shang said in a soft voice. Eastern Europe had now become a deadlock. Even if all the superpowers had entered Reki City, if there were no special reasons, there would be at most undercurrents surging in the city. Wulan State was now the place where all the superpowers confronted each other, and all the contradictions were concentrated here. But if there was no absolute certainty, no one would dare to take the lead to take action. Everyone would maintain restraint and reason. To put it bluntly, this was a deadlock. Wang Tianzong needed someone to break this deadlock and create opportunities. He needed an invincible realm expert to do all this. Because in such a situation, only the invincible realm expert on the divine list could break this deadlock, so that Wang Tianzong could see the opportunity. And His Majesty needed Wang Tianzong to break the deadlock. Because compared to the Wang family of Beihai and Wang Tianzong, he was far behind them in terms of background and personal strength. The farther the gap was, the more he naturally asked for. Wang Tianzong was now the strongest in the dark world. If he took action, it was impossible to overturn the whole dark world, but he could break the current deadlock and break it into pieces. What Wang Tianzong needed was a gap. And His Majesty needed countless gaps. The more gaps there were, the more he could do. So Shang felt that His Majesty's X-ray was not so wonderful. It was equivalent to reminding Wang Tianzong that there might be another hand behind the chaos in Eastern Europe, which would only make him more cautious. Wang Tianzong was not a fool who was brave but not astute. Which was more important, the power of the Li family or the threat posed by His Majesty, the hand behind the scenes? Wang Tianzong's current choice could tell. Wang Tianzong is not stupid. His Majesty said lightly. Shang looked at His Majesty and thought, isn't this nonsense? Do you know how to deal with smart people? His Majesty laughed and his voice was a little low. The best way is not to try to hide anything from him. If I send the X-ray over, I will tell him that after the chaos, I will also tell him that the Li family may be very strong now. It doesn't matter whether he believes it or not. It doesn't matter whether he does it or not. The most important thing is, His Majesty paused and said lightly, if I want him to take action, he must take action. So what if he is smart? So what if he is a half-step chosen one? Under the general trend, the real chosen one will have no choice but to be driven into a corner. So what if he is smart and sees through everything? When dealing with smart people, the most important thing to do is not to hide anything from him, but to give him a path where he has no choice. This was very reasonable. But Shang did not understand. Azure Dragon, white tiger, vermilion bird, and black tortoise. The general of dead spirits of Xianxia state could be said to be awe-inspiring. Xiang, code-named White Tiger, was the oldest and the most experienced of the 4 spirit generals. But in the mind of Xianxia state, the correct order of the 4 spirits was Azure Dragon, Vermilion Bird, White Tiger, and Black Tortoise. The most experienced Black Tortoise was more important than the least experienced Black Tortoise. It was not a matter of strength. Xiang's strength was definitely not bad. He could be said to be a top expert among the half-step invincible realm experts. In recent years, his weight was gradually surpassed by Vermilion Bird. In addition to his age, the biggest problem was that White Tiger was unwilling to use his brain. So Xiang thought for a while and did not come up with a specific result. He simply asked directly, "What do you want me to do, Your Majesty?" From now on, start all our intelligence systems in Eastern Europe, and entrust the intelligence agencies of several other superpowers to help me spread 2 pieces of information. His Majesty's fingers gently stroked the folder in front of him. His eyes were calm and indifferent. The master of Samsara Palace is not dead, and she is not even injured. Now she is hiding in the dark, waiting for an opportunity at any time, and even creating an opportunity. Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong destroyed the headquarters of Samsara Palace with a sword strike, but it hit nothing. Xiang did not speak and listened quietly. The destruction of Samsara Palace was too sudden. Under Wang Tianzong's sword strike, the entire headquarters of Samsara Palace was destroyed. This matter was too abrupt. On the one hand, it could completely prove Wang Tianzong's peerless strength, but on the other hand, it made people feel strange. But because of the recognition of Wang Tianzong's strength, the Dark World did not suspect anything. Second, there is more than one master of Samsara Palace in Samsara Palace. Military Counselor Saint is not the strongest supermaster of Samsara Palace. His Majesty continued. This news had been confirmed. At least a few days ago, when Jiang Qiansong fled, the invincible realm expert who interrupted the followers' communication with Jiang Qiansong was not the master of Samsara Palace. His Majesty would spread this news 3 times, but he would not provide evidence. Maybe some people did not believe it, but as long as one person believed it, there would be some changes in the whole chaos. You have 3 days to do all this. I will wait for your news in Xianxia state. His Majesty looked at Xiang and said in a tough tone. Xiang nodded. This was not a difficult task, so he answered without hesitation, "Don't worry, Your Majesty." His Majesty smiled, looked down at the folder on the table, and said calmly, "Send a person who can be absolutely trusted to Lin. I have something here that can block all Wang Tianzong's retreat. Take it to Eastern Europe and find a way to send it to Wang Tianzong." Xiang froze for a moment, then nodded. "I'll arrange it right away." His Majesty did not speak again and hung up the phone directly. Darkness returned to the private room. His Majesty sat on the sofa, closed his eyes, and thought quietly. The chaos in Eastern Europe had now involved all his attention. Qin Weibai was undoubtedly his biggest opponent. But the Purgatory of Heaven capital, the Wang family of Beihai, and the Vatican were also not easy to deal with. In this situation, His Majesty felt like a child grabbing a piece of cake that everyone coveted in the middle of a group of strong men with knives. Now he did have a lot of chips. The 3 disciples represented 3 kinds of power. But except for Jifeng Sword Raining School, neither Xiang nor Mellad could use their power unscrupulously. Moreover, he could use the power of the 3 disciples, but he also had to help the 3 disciples get what they wanted. Thinking about it carefully, there were really not many resources that could really let him squander unscrupulously. His Majesty sighed softly and suddenly thought of Jiang Qiansong and the Jiang family of South America. He really felt a little pity. If he could save Jiang Qiansong, the Jiang family of South America, which had lost 2 invincible realm experts, was badly injured, and had to withdraw from Eastern Europe in embarrassment, was bound to cooperate with him. A Jiang family of South America, even if it was badly injured, could play a much greater role. He would be able to play a much greater role than the 3 disciples combined. Given the current situation of the Jiang family of South America, what he needed to pay was much less. What a pity. His Majesty opened his eyes and suddenly wanted to know how Jiang Qiansong was doing now, and whether there was still a chance to reverse the position of the Jiang family of South America. He refused a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Jiang Qiansong's current situation was naturally not good. That night, he suddenly attacked but failed to kill Qin Weibai, which had already doomed him to be treated savagely. That night, the stars were lonely on the top of the mountain, and the moonlight was bright. Outside Reki City, which paid great attention to the environment, there was nothing to be picky about except that it was a little cold. The night breeze could be regarded as relaxing. Jiang Qiansong did not want to talk about cooperation with Qin Weibai in that samsara palace. So Qin Weibai simply changed Jiang Qiansong's place. The disciple's judgment was actually wrong, because Qin Weibai was not in the secret base of the Jiang family of South America. Shi, Lin Fengting, and Gong Sun Qi returned to Mormon City together, with Jiang Qiansong, a super important captive. It was not the first time that Qin Weibai had done this kind of thing. So it was not the first time that the underground secret chamber in Mormon's Manor had received such a standard of prisoners. The secret chamber under the manor still shone with a cold metallic luster. In the house completely condensed by metal, Jiang Qiansong's whole body was tightly sucked to the high-strength magnet wall. The outside of this special house was metal, but the inside walls were all magnets. The huge suction came from every wall and ceiling in all directions, tearing Jiang Qiansong's body. Such a huge magnetic field was playing a role all the time. All signals had completely disappeared in this special cell, but the sound of the broadcast came in through a special device from the outside. This was a broadcast from all over the world, but it was all intercepted from the same clip. In all the clips, countless hosts were angrily rebuking what the Jiang family of South America had done in Wulan State in different tones, rebuking how cruel and ruthless he was in killing President Carlos. The news kept playing, and it was transmitted into Jiang Qiansong's ears over and over again. The huge magnetic field tore at his body desperately, and the constant repetition of the news ruthlessly destroyed his spirit. Jiang Qiansong endured all of this without saying a word. He thought that he had persevered very well, but even he did not know that his spirit had gradually weakened to the lowest point. Qin Weibai had been living in the secret chamber for a few days, observing Jiang Qiansong's mental state, not anxious or impatient. Flaming Fire, who was a little pale, stood beside Qin Weibai and quietly looked at a black instrument beside her. There were only a few buttons on the instrument, which were used to control the volume of the broadcast in that special cell. There were also radio channels. Flaming Fire had been staying here almost 24 hours a day these days. She would adjust the sound every hour and switch the channel at the same time. Sometimes the sound was very loud, and sometimes it was very low. There were various languages in the radio channels, including Chinese, English, French, and Latin. All the means had only one purpose, that was to torture Jiang Qiansong's spirit. Flaming Fire looked at her watch. It was 11:45 noon. She reached out and casually pressed a few buttons on the instrument. The sound in the cell began to amplify, and the different prophecies of various channels suddenly began to play irregularly. "That's it." Qin Weibai suddenly said, "You take a break." "I'm not tired." Flaming Fire shook her head gently. "Take a break." Qin Weibai repeated it again. Flaming Fire glanced at her and nodded, but she couldn't help saying, "Boss, I think it's almost done." "Not yet." Qin Weibai stared at Jiang Qiansong in the cell through the screen in front of her and said slowly, "Only when his spirit is the closest to collapse can I hypnotize him. The will of the invincible realm is not so easy to destroy. Their spiritual defense is no worse than that of martial arts. Boss, if your spiritual domain reaches the transcendent realm." Flaming Fire's eyes were a little fanatical. Even the Pope of the transcendent realm can't easily control an invincible realm expert. At most, he can protect himself, but it's difficult to affect the other's will. Flaming Fire said, "Oh. 1 more week and it's almost done." Qin Weibai whispered, approached the microphone in front of her, and said calmly, "Mr. Jiang, can we talk now?" On the wall, Jiang Qiansong's body moved with difficulty. He was silent for a while, then gritted his teeth and said with difficulty, "Bitch?" Qin Weibai was not angry at all. She just said blandly, "Then you continue to think about it." She reached out and snapped her fingers. This action was very straightforward, very heroic, but also a little charming and delicate. Jiang Qiansong opened his eyes with difficulty. A huge butterfly appeared in the cell in front of him. The butterfly was colorful, flapping its wings with difficulty in the huge magnetic field, and its posture looked extremely distorted. There were more and more butterflies, dancing. The whole world began to spin in Jiang Qiansong's eyes with the wings of the butterfly. The world was spinning. Outside the cell, Qin Weibai stood up and reached out to turn off the instrument in front of flaming fire. The huge broadcast sound disappeared in an instant. The absolute noise turned into extreme silence in an instant. Everything around Jiang Qiansong was still spinning, as if it was about to fall into a bottomless abyss. In the absolute silence and dizziness, Jiang Qiansong finally couldn't help but struggle wildly. Qin Weibai and Flaming Fire walked out of the underground secret chamber. It was noon. The eternal night in Mormons was still the same, and the stars were dim. "Have a rest," Qin Weibai said. "Boss, what do you want to eat?" "I'll make it," Flaming Fire said softly. "No." Qin Weibai shook her head. Flaming Fire said yes, turned around, and walked to her residence. Qin Weibai wandered aimlessly in her manor. The eternal night was cold. The manor was full of flowers. The rich fragrance of flowers blended with Qin Weibai's natural body fragrance, making people forget the vulgarity. "Boss Qin." A voice suddenly sounded. Qin Weibai slowly turned around. Tribulation came out of the darkness. "Do we still have to wait?" asked the only assassin of the invincible realm in the dark world. Qin Weibai said that Mormons would be the place of the final battle. But now it seemed that the place of the final battle seemed to be moving to Ulan State. Then what was the point of them waiting here? Qin Weibai looked at Tribulation in front of her with deep meaning in her eyes. "Wait for another week," she said softly. Tribulation frowned and wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. "What do you want to say?" Qin Weibai smiled. In an instant, it seemed that even the night light became bright and beautiful. "Boss Qin, are you familiar with the Dark Nights?" Tribulation asked. The Samsara Palace had a close relationship with the Dark Nights. The whole Dark World knew this. The Dark Saint Spear, the murderous weapon of the Dark Nights, had been fired for the Samsara Palace. Qin Weibai did not answer Tribulation's question. She just looked at Tribulation quietly and suddenly said, "Can't you let it go?" Tribulation froze for a moment. He was silent for a moment and said, "Can't you let it go?" This seemed to be a repetition or a question to himself, but in fact he was asking Qin Weibai. "I can't let it go." Qin Weibai replied resolutely. Tribulation nodded. "Me too." Qin Weibai sighed softly. She seemed to want to say something, but she didn't know how to start. In the end, she just said a few words with a pale face. "There is no result." "What about you?" Tribulation asked. "I'm trying hard. I don't want to give up either." She was talking about Tribulation and Angel. He was talking about Qin Weibai and Li Tianlun. Qin Weibai was silent for a while and said quietly, "Let's wait another week. After we tame Jiang Qiansong, we'll go to Ulan State." Tame? Tribulation glanced at Qin Weibai and thought to himself, does she regard the patriarch of the Jiang family of South America as a beast? Jiang Qiansong is here. What about the deal with the Jiang family of South America? Tribulation asked suddenly. Qin Weibai reached out and picked a white flower. She tore the petals and said lightly, "There are still people in the Jiang family of South America who can speak. Now the news has almost come back." It was noon on August 12th in Eastern Europe. While everyone was paying attention to the situation in Eastern Europe, a piece of news swept through the dark world without warning. The news came from South America. After the great change in Ulan State, the Jiang family of South America, which had been silent and allowed the outside world to condemn it, finally made a sound. The timing was extremely delicate. At this time, it had been nearly 6 days since the great change. Under the pressure of countless public opinions, the entire Jiang family of South America was divided up by the major forces. At this time, the Jiang family of South America made a sound. It was undoubtedly a choice to make a concession. After giving up a lot of benefits, it tentatively took a step forward. Jiang Guichu, the heir of the Jiang family of South America, personally faced the media and admitted everything that Jiang Qiansong had done in Wulan State. When the world was in an uproar, the young man in his 30s once again announced an even more shocking news. The family council of the Jiang family of South America elected Jiang Guichu as the new patriarch of the Jiang family of South America. Jiang Qiansong, the former patriarch of the Jiang family of South America, was permanently expelled from the Jiang family of South America and completely removed from the family tree. This ruthless and refusal completely severed the relationship between the Jiang family of South America and Jiang Qiansong. At the same time, it was equivalent to getting rid of those sins. And Jiang Guichu apologized to the people and high-level officials of Wulan State with an extremely sincere attitude. He expressed his willingness to give Wulan State enough compensation, whether it was in terms of economy or support. Such an apology could be said to be full of sincerity in a low-profile manner in front of the whole world. In order to express 120,000 points of sincerity, after the Jiang family of South America decided to expel Jiang Qiansong, the first thing the new patriarch did was to apologize. Not only the media apologized. It was also a face-to-face apology. Jiang Guichu, the new patriarch of the Jiang family of South America, wanted to come to Wulan State in person and apologize to Wulan State. This could almost be said to be the most murderous and ambitious apology in the dark world in recent decades. Everything seemed to be pointing to two words. The Jiang family was not convinced. Chapter 473. Li Tianlan was still in a coma. Therefore, the major forces in Reki City were still celebrating. At this time, the whole Reki City was in a very strange atmosphere, just like the chaotic period when the old era ended and the new era had not yet begun. Conspiracies and deceit, blood and betrayal, coercion and temptation, struggle and degeneration, reason and madness, hesitation, greed, hypocrisy, and insidious, all seemed to be gathered together. Reki City had been completely wrapped in the dark world. Looking at Reki City in the dark, everything seemed extremely naked. At noon on August 11th, the funeral of President Carlos of Wulan State had just been held. Prime Minister Riker, who was temporarily acting as president, gave a speech that shocked the world. In the speech, Prime Minister Riker fully affirmed President Carlos's contribution to Wulan State and expressed high respect and praise for everything he had done. The whole speech lasted 40 minutes. In the first 10 minutes, he praised Carlos's great achievements. Then Prime Minister Riker changed the subject. With a very serious expression, he said that Wulan State was in an unprecedented period of turmoil and that Reki City was facing a huge threat. At this time, Wulan State needed the help of friends. When everyone just noticed that something was wrong, President Riker had directly said that Zhongzhou State was Wulan State's closest friend. When Wulan State encountered a major danger and crisis, as a friend, he asked for help from Zhongzhou State. President Riker very sincerely invited Zhongzhou State to station troops in Reki City in Wulan State, and it would be better to station more than 10,000 elite troops to help Wulan State survive this crisis. Prime Minister Riker hoped that Zhongzhou State could let go of the previous misunderstanding and look forward to the future. Under his repeated sincere invitation, Lieutenant General Cheng Huaining, commander of the Arctic Ocean Command of Zhongzhou State, finally made a decision after consulting the Hidden Dragon Sea. The Arctic Ocean Command was willing to send an elite division into Wulan State to help Wulan State survive this crisis. On the morning of August 12th, on the surface, it was the division of the Arctic Ocean Command, but in fact, 10,000 elites of the Snowdance Corps had arrived outside Reki City. At this time, the Heroes Club, Fantasy World, Men in Black, the Vatican, the Dark Knights, and other forces of all sizes had gathered in Reki City. At the same time that the Snowdance Corps arrived in Reki City opened its gate. Bands gathered in the city, and there were bursts of gun salutes. Prime Minister Riker personally went out of the city gate to meet the snow dance corps. There were cheering people on both sides of the road. All the scenes looked like a hero returning triumphantly from a phantom. The snow dance corps was temporarily stationed in the square outside the office of the president. Prime Minister Riker personally urged the Minister of Finance of Wulan State to allocate funds and plan to build a military base outside Wulan State that could accommodate 20,000 people. This move fully indicated the possibility that Xianxia State would continue to send more troops to Wulan State in the future. The square in front of the office of the president became the temporary station of the snow dance corps. There were 5,000 people in the snow dance corps who first came to Wulan State. In the end, there were less than 2,600 left. Among them, 2,000 were heavily armed troops equipped with the most advanced weapons of Xianxia State. Now there were 10,000 people coming to Wulan State. In total, there were over 6,000 people in the heavy soldier division. An elite army that was armed to the teeth completely surrounded the presidential palace. Roaring main battle tanks, swiftly cruising armored vehicles, silent but uniform formations, the entire city seemed to be filled with the smell of iron and blood with the arrival of these 10,000 elites. The snow dance corps patrolled around the office of the president 24 hours a day and never gave up any doubts. The reason was simple. Their army commander, their grand marshal, was currently in the pavilion Lord Manor, still unconscious. The whole dark world was closely watching the snow dance corps outside the office of the president. Perhaps at the beginning, many people despised the snow dance corps. This special warfare corps, which was established in the final battle of Heaven Capital 3 years ago, was divided into 3 groups to fight for East Island. On the battlefields of North America and Northern Europe, the snow dance corps did not perform well. But on the battlefields of Eastern Europe, it was a young man who finally turned the tide. Because of this, the snow dance corps did not have much importance in the dark world. But this time, the young man who saved the snow dance corps by himself 3 years ago became the new commander. The entire snow dance corps seemed to burst out with unparalleled brilliance. In one day, 2 invincible realm experts died in Li Tianlan's hands. The 5,000 members of the snow dance corps marched rapidly in 2 batches. Nearly 3,000 people broke through the defense lines of 3 countries in one day. 30,000 people defeated 60,000 people. They moved forward with indomitable will and were invincible. They were like the commander of gods and demons. They were like the army of gods and demons. After the battle, in the eyes of the dark world, the entire snow dance corps had become the fiercest divine sword in Xianxia State. From top to bottom, it was filled with an invincible power. Now the snow dance corps was stationed in front of the office of the president. They had high-tech advanced equipment, an amazing morale with indomitable will, and a strict and cautious patrol square. All of this surrounded the office of the president. The entire office of the president had become a real inescapable net. This was the incomparable advantage that Xianxia State had gained in Wulan State. The Heroes Club had invincible realm experts, the Men in Black had invincible realm experts, the Vatican, Fantasy World, and the Dark Knights. They all had invincible realm experts. They were all stronger than Li Tianlan. But even if Li Tianlan was in a coma now, with more than 10,000 elites of the snow dance corps here, Xianxia State was the most powerful force in Wulan State. With such an advantage, it could even be said that the general trend had been decided. But the superpowers still did not give up. Countless killers, businessmen, socialites, negotiators, private detectives, and senior agents were active in Reki City. They drew the high-level forces of Wulan State to their side and destroyed any threats at the same time. In just a few days, Reki City had become a veritable dark city. The situation in Wulan State seemed to have gradually calmed down with the snow dance corps entering the city. But people's hearts began to fluctuate like never before. In the extreme chaos, rumors spread everywhere, casting a layer of fog over Reki City, which was getting darker and darker. It was said that the master of Samsara Palace had not died. The entire chaos in Eastern Europe was planned by the Samsara Palace. When all the forces were busy fighting for interests, the master of Samsara Palace was hiding in the dark, ready to give everyone a fatal blow at any time. In fact, the Samsara Palace had always had a secret agreement with the Wang family of Beihai. The master of Samsara Palace actually came from Beihai and was Wang Tianzong's confidant. Wang Tianzong's sword attack this time was all an act. The truth was that the Samsara Palace and the Wang family of Beihai were conspiring against Eastern Europe and even Europe. The Qin clan helped the Snowdance Corps this time not because of the interference of the Lin clan. In fact, the Qin clan took a fancy to Li Tianlan's future potential and planned to unite with the Li family by marriage. Li Tianlan had fought with several invincible realm experts one after another and had received irreversible injuries. He had no hope of being invincible for the rest of his life. Even his foundation had been completely destroyed and he had become a useless person. Li Tianlan had died in the office of the president, and the news was currently blocked. The men in black and the Dark Knights were secretly conspiring against the Knights Templar of the Vatican. Angel, the Holy Virgin of the Vatican, traveled in Europe many years ago and fell in love with a top assassin in the Dark World. Now she was unclean. Everything was a conspiracy of Xianxia state. For Wulan state, Xianxia state was the real invader. The Jiang family of South America was completely innocent, and they should be the best friends of Wulan state. Prime Minister Riker had applied for citizenship of Xianxia state and even sworn in to join the party. Tostel, the new patriarch of Rekvia, had been secretly contacting the Shadow Throne and was ready to expose what the Snowdance Corps had done at the right time. Like a hurricane, the rumors swept through Reki City in an instant, sprinkled all over Wulan state, and resounded throughout the Dark World. These rumors seemed to be the result of the joint operation of various forces. Each force spread a version that was beneficial to itself, and if one thought about it carefully, there was a trace of possibility. The rumors became more and more intense, and the spread became more and more exaggerated. The entire Reki City had become completely chaotic. August 17th. It was the 10th day of Li Tianlan's coma. The rain in Eastern Europe was flying wildly, and the air in Reki City gradually became bitterly cold. In the conference room of the office of the president, where the heater had been turned on, Dongqing Rushi quietly looked through the summary information of Reki City over the past few days. The intelligence of the Arctic Ocean Command and the intelligence of the Samsara Palace had formed a huge database in the office of the president. After all the information had been screened layer by layer, it was still dense and innumerable. Dongqing Rushi looked at it quietly with clear eyes and said nothing. In the conference room, the high-level officials of the Snowdance Corps were studying everything that had happened in the past few days. Eastern Europe was in chaos. Reki City was even more chaotic. In front of the office of the president, it was the liveliest. The president of the Heroes Club wanted to visit the office of the president yesterday but was turned away. Angel, the Holy Virgin of the Vatican, came to visit Li Tianlan's injury, but was also turned away by Dongqing Rushi. In recent days, more and more experts in the Dark World began to wait for an opportunity to approach the office of the president. The artillery of the Snowdance Corps sounded several times, leaving behind the corpses of several thundershocking realm experts, but most of them were nameless. After all, the crazy rumors had some effect. Many people couldn't verify the truth of some rumors. But the place where Li Tianlan was in a coma was out in the open. There were many rumors about Li Tianlan, and it could even be said that he was the most. Some said that he had lost all his foundation, some said that he had no hope of being invincible, some said that he had become a vegetable, and some said that he had died. Everyone was concerned about Li Tianlan's physical condition, because the deterrent power of the Snowdance Corps was too great. In the Dark World, an invincible realm expert was indeed the peak. However, tens of thousands of heavy-armored and light-armored troops mixed together, equipped with the most advanced weapons, had the destructive power to destroy everything on any battlefield. The Snowdance Corps was the elite of the elite. When they stayed in Reki City, no one could relax. After all, the Snowdance Corps had just performed the feat of defeating 60,000 people with 3,000 people, and it was under the circumstance that they were surrounded by heavy firepower and had no weapons of mass destruction. Now the 10,000 people of the Snowdance Corps were equivalent to how many troops of other countries were there? A conservative estimate was that it was equivalent to 100,000 troops, and 100,000 troops were equipped with heavy firepower. Under such strong power, even if an invincible realm expert could struggle to survive under the artillery fire, he would be regarded as an expert in the invincible realm, not to mention doing anything. And Li Tianlan was undoubtedly the backbone of the Snowdance Corps. All the rumors were equivalent to the actions of the major forces to destroy the morale of the Snowdance Corps. Once the morale of the Snowdance Corps was unstable, the stable situation managed by Xianxia state would be turbulent. At that time, it would be an opportunity for anyone. I still stick to this suggestion. In the spacious conference room, Riker, who also participated in this meeting, said seriously, "Now, as long as we stabilize the situation, we are already in an invincible position. Everyone, no matter how the rumors spread, they are just rumors. Although His Highness is seriously injured, it will not be a big deal. We don't have to care about what others say. As long as His Highness wakes up, all the rumors will disappear as soon as possible. As long as we stabilize, we won't lose anything. I remember there is a saying in Xianxia state, 'Endure for a while, and everything will be calm. Take a step back.'" Li Zhonghu, who was sitting opposite Prime Minister Riker, subconsciously curled his lips and said with a grim smile, "Endure? When did we, Thunderbolt, endure? It's true that no one cares about some rumors, but who can stand the clowns who keep talking? I have men and guns now. In my opinion, we should take advantage of the fact that His Highness wakes up to fight them all out. What heroes club? What men in black? Bullshit. Once my army sweeps over, I'll see where the heroes club can go to be their hero. Fight them all out?" Drifting Cloud, the deputy commander of the Snowdance Corps, suddenly said, "Thunderbolt is indeed very strong, but our opponents are not weak. If they join forces, if several invincible realm experts rush forward, they may be able to break the formation of the Snowdance Corps. At that time, the Snowdance Corps will definitely suffer heavy losses." Losses? When have the people of Thunderbolt been afraid of this? Li Zhonghu looked dissatisfied. "But such losses are meaningless." Riker reached out and knocked on the table heavily. Now, he was completely on the side of Xianxia state. Whether he was willing or not, the scene of him killing President Carlos had been stored in the top-secret files of the highest level of Xianxia state. He had no choice but to lower his head and be a dog at Li Tianlan's feet. If Xianxia state failed and withdrew from Reki City, his future would almost come to an end. And this was not the worst thing. Wulan state has seen the bravery of the Snowdance Corps, but the super forces in the Dark World are not the army of Wulan state. You are not afraid of losses, but if we don't fight them out, the Corps will suffer heavy losses. When His Majesty wakes up, there will not be enough power in his hands. How will you explain to His Highness? What did you say? Li Zhonghu stared at Prime Minister Riker angrily. Mr. Prime Minister is right. At least now, there are several invincible realm experts in Reki City. We have nothing. Drifting Cloud said slowly. Li Zhonghu glanced at him and touched his big head casually. Wang Tianzong is in Reki City. Drifting Cloud was stunned. He took a deep look at Li Zhonghu and couldn't help laughing. Li Zhonghu was an absolutely fierce general. He charged forward and never retreated. Such people were often not particularly good at planning. But this did not mean that Li Zhonghu was stupid. Wang Tianzong was still in Reki City. If the Snowdance Corps came out in full force and made up their mind to wipe out all the martial arts forces in Reki City, what would Wang Tianzong do then? He was the Patriarch of Beihai and the Sword Emperor of Xianxia State. The Snowdance Corps was Li Tianlan's corps and also the corps of Xianxia State. As the Sword Emperor of Xianxia State, he had no reason not to draw his sword when his country's corps was at war, no matter how reluctant he was. Deadlock, Li Zhonghu whispered. At this moment, there seemed to be something unusual in his eyes. Cool breeze and drifting cloud. Everyone, including Prime Minister Riker, was shocked. Deadlock. Drifting Cloud murmured to himself. The major forces are testing each other. They can fight in the dark, but they dare not fight openly. Because whoever makes the first move is likely to be the loser. This is strange because he is not for the weak, but for the strong. Wang Tianzong is very strong, and everyone is targeting him. If he makes the first move, he will definitely be targeted by everyone. Li Zonghu said blandly, if he doesn't want to make a move, then we will create an opportunity for him to make a move. We are the most elite corps of Zhongzhou state. When fighting with foreign forces, Wang Tianzong won't make a move. What does he want to do? Does he dare not make a move? But in this way, Drifting Cloud frowned. It's worth it. Li Zonghu's words directly interrupted Drifting Cloud's words. Dongqing Rushi looked up at Li Zonghu and frowned slightly. She was pure, but she had been cultivated as the future hostess of the Li family since she was a child. How could she really know nothing? Li Zonghu's meaning was obvious. Li Tianlan now had a lot of chips in his hands. For example, the Samsara Palace, the Shadow Sect, Sai City, the Qin clan, the Lin clan, and even the Vatican were all potential allies of Li Tianlan. Even if Li Tianlan could not use all of this power, it was not inferior to any superforce. The Snowdance Corps was very strong. But no matter how strong it was also an army. The army was full of soldiers. When needed, soldiers should do what they had to do. Li Zonghu swept away all the forces in Reki City. He obviously regarded himself and the Snowdance Corps as abandoned pawns to force Wang Tianzong to make a move. At that time, the Snowdance Corps was destined to suffer heavy losses. And if Wang Tianzong did not want to commit treason, he would definitely make a move. He would definitely be targeted by all the forces in the Dark World, so he would definitely be injured. And the injured Wang Tianzong would definitely hit all the super forces hard. At that time, Li Tianlan would not have the Snowdance Corps in his hands, but the chips he left were enough to deal with all the remaining dark forces. All of Eastern Europe would also fall into Li Tianlan's hands, and at the same time, into the hands of Zhongzhou state. In this way, it might not be a perfect ending to the chaos in Eastern Europe, but no one would feel that it was a loss. And the price? Maybe it was the lives of everyone in the entire Snowdance Corps, including Li Zonghu, except for the part of people who stayed in Im. More than 10,000 people. Dongqing Rushi's eyes became clearer and deeper. The timing Li Zonghu chose was so perfect, and his means were so cruel and resolute. This style of risking himself was very much like a person in her heart. Dongqing Rushi was in a daze. Uncle Li, would he be one of her people? This might be the best way to solve the chaos in Eastern Europe. But how could she bear to do that? Everyone fell silent. Even the two deputy marshals, Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud, were tempted. This opportunity was really rare. Even if he was criticized in the future, it would not be Li Tianlan's fault. After all, he was still in a coma. But the final result was that Li Tianlan could get all the benefits. It was a heavy loss for him to lose the Snowdance Corps. But compared to what he would get after the plan succeeded, it was nothing. The most important thing was that once Wang Tianzong and the Wang family of Beihai withdrew from the chaos in Eastern Europe, Li Tianlan would no longer have to worry about the monstrous pressure of the Wang family of Beihai. Executing in Eastern Europe. Bad things would become good things, and it would be the best stage for Li Tianlan to rise and build his own foundation. Who could not be tempted by such an opportunity? To some extent, this evil plan was actually the civil strife in Zhongzhou state. But all of this was real and effective. As long as he could achieve his goal, who would care about this? No. A soft voice suddenly sounded. Everyone was stunned. They turned their heads. Dongqing Rushi put down the information in her hand and shook her head again. Young madam. Second Mississippi, in the conference room, Li Wangxing and Li Zonghu stood up at the same time. We can't do this. Dongqing Rushi said seriously. This is the best opportunity, Li Wangxing said in a confused tone. But it's also the most dangerous time. Dongqing Rushi glanced at Li Wangxing thoughtfully. That gaze was a little special. Li Wangxing turned his head subconsciously. Why? Even Prime Minister Riker, who had always sought stability, could not help asking. If Li Zonghu's plan could be realized, Wulan state would stabilize in the shortest time. This was what he needed most. Because His Majesty Sword Emperor has the Queen by his side. Dongqing Rushi said calmly, When the Snowdance Corps goes out to wipe out all the superpowers, if the Shadow Throne comes to attack the office of the president, what will Tianlan do? There was silence. Only Dongqing Rushi's voice sounded. Maybe your plan will succeed, and His Majesty Sword Emperor will be injured. But if something happens to Tianlan in the office of the president, even if the Wang family of Beihai withdraws from Eastern Europe, will they win? Li Zhonghu scratched his head, opened his mouth, and subconsciously glanced at Li Wangxing. Dongqing Rushi had no position in the Snowdance Corps. But she was the person with the strongest influence on the high-level officials and even on all the soldiers besides Li Tianlan. There were only 20,000 people in the Snowdance Corps. 15,000 of them came from the Border Control Corps. 3 years ago, they were the trump-card elite Thunderbolt Battalion of the Border Control Corps. They were the direct subordinates of Dongqing Wudi. And now, they were the direct subordinates of Marshal Li Tianlan of the Snowdance Corps. Dongqing Rushi was Dongqing Wudi's daughter and Li Tianlan's fiancée. This identity was more useful than any military rank. Li Wangxing coughed dryly, but he frowned. He subconsciously glanced at the corner. Qin Shilai, the Dark Sword Master of Eastern Europe, was sitting in the corner. Qin Shilai was their important combat force. If they wanted to carry out this plan, he was indispensable. But at that time, the office of the president would indeed be extremely empty. If the Qin clan could protect the office of the president with all its strength, then maybe. Doorbell suddenly rang. Rieker said in a deep voice, "Come in." The Prime Minister's secretary came in and said respectfully, "Mr. Prime Minister, there is a guest named Qin Weiyun outside the door. She wants to visit Mr. Qin Shilai." Qin Weiyun. This somewhat familiar name caused everyone to be startled. Qin Shilai raised his eyebrows in surprise, and then laughed. "That's my niece. Let her in." If there were any typos, you could leave a message in the book review section, and I would correct it as soon as I saw it. Recently, I wrote a big chapter. It was inevitable that I had some negligence. Chapter 474. Almost everyone in Eastern Europe knew about the Dark Sword Master. In many cases, the name Qin Shilai was even more famous than that of Qin Dongchao, the patriarch of the Qin clan in Eastern Europe. But now, very few people present had heard of Qin Weiyun. Qin Weiyun was Qin Shilai's niece. The Qin clan was a real rich clan in Eastern Europe. It should not be a secret to the senior management of the Snowdance Corps, who had already focused on Eastern Europe, who were outstanding in the younger generation of the Qin clan. But the senior officials of the Snowdance Corps had never heard of this name. Even the rumor that the Qin clan intended to marry Li Tianlan a few days ago was not this name, but Qin Qinyao, the young lady of the Qin clan. Who is Qin Weiyun? In fact, this could not be regarded as a problem that the higher-ups of the Snowdance Corps were concerned about. However, this name gave rise to an unusual conjecture. No one in the Dark World knew Qin Weiyun. But there were still people who knew Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai, Qin Weiyun. When the two names were put together, it was enough to make one's imagination roam. The relationship between the Qin clan and the Lin clan was no longer a secret. But the truth could never be denied. For many years, there was indeed a deep estrangement between the Qin clan and the Lin clan, so that they were actually much closer to the Wang family of Beihai. Even before Li Tianlan came to Eastern Europe this time, the Qin clan would become a close ally of the Wang family of Beihai in everyone's eyes. But the truth was the complete opposite. The Qin clan actually chose to stand with Li Tianlan. If Lin Fengting's words could make the Qin clan change their stance, then where did the estrangement between the Qin clan and the Lin clan come from? No one believed that the two families were standing together again because of Lin Fengting's words. However, no one knew why the Qin clan would suddenly change their stance. Until this time, the name Qin Weiyun appeared. Everyone in the conference room focused their eyes on Qin Shilai. Everyone thought of the same question. Did Qin Weibai, who represented the highest will of the Samsara Palace most of the time, come from the Qin clan? No one knew where Qin Weibai came from. Therefore, all of this was extremely reasonable. The only unreasonable thing was that when Qin Weibai first appeared in Zhongzhou State, She seemed to be from a small mountain village in the southwest of Zhongzhou State. Could she be an illegitimate daughter? Was she the illegitimate daughter of one of the major characters in the Qin clan? Light footsteps could be heard outside the conference room. A young girl with bright eyes and a pure face walked in. The young girl was about 20 years old, fresh and refined, without the slightest bit of arrogance and coldness that a daughter of a rich and powerful family should have. Her appearance could not be considered a peerless beauty, but anyone who saw her would feel very comfortable. She was lively and intelligent, without the slightest bit of sharpness. Sixth uncle. The girl smiled and said hello to Qin Shilai. Her bright eyes narrowed like crescent moons. Qin Shilai nodded. Why are you here? The Qin clan was very large. Although it was a branch separated from the Lin clan, its internal network was also extremely complicated. Qin Weiyun's status in the Lin clan was not too high before. Her family was also relatively ordinary in the Qin clan. Her parents were executives of a subordinate group of the Qin clan. After many years of hard work and the dividends of the group, they could barely have a family property of less than 9 figures. Such a family was already prominent enough among ordinary people. But compared with the Qin clan, all the assets of Qin Weiyun's family were even worth a luxury car customized by several core young people of the Qin clan, which was quite inconspicuous in the entire Qin clan. However, Qin Shilai liked Qin Weiyun very much and had always doted on her. A few years ago, after Qin Weiyun returned from a trip to Western Europe, the status of their small family in the Qin clan soared. Now their family had a very close relationship with Qin Shilai. However, although the relationship between them was good, Qin Weiyun was not the kind of child who ran from Baiyu State to Wulan State just to see second uncle. Now she came here. Could it be? There was a flash of confusion and doubt in his eyes. I'm here to see sixth uncle. Qin Weiyun giggled. Qin Shilai nodded calmly and did not introduce them to Qin Weiyun. He just smiled and said, "That's all for today?" Li Wangxing wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. He glanced at Qin Shilai. "General, you don't have to look at me." Qin Shilai laughed and said, "I can do something, but at present, I agree with Miss Dongqing's idea the most. This plan is really good, and the benefits will be extremely crazy. But the safety of Tianlan and the lives of tens of thousands of iron-blooded soldiers of the Snowdance Corps, please think about it more." He nodded and turned to leave with Qin Weiyun. There was silence in the conference room. Li Zonghu frowned and subconsciously glanced at Li Wangxing again. Li Wangxing was silent for a long time before he glanced at Dongqing Rushi. He asked with an extremely serious expression, "Young madam, how is the young master's injury?" No one knew the current injury. Li Tianlan was admitted to the office of the president on the day he was in a coma. For this reason, the office of the president invited the most famous experts in Europe. After the examination with the most advanced equipment, Li Tianlan had been in a coma until now. No one went in to have a look. Only Dongqing Rushi was taking care of Li Tianlan's body. Dongqing Rushi looked in the direction where Qin Weiyun left and was lost in thought. After a long time she whispered, "Very good. He should wake up soon." Although the office of the president in Wulan State was not shabby, it was not very luxurious. In Europe, where the power of capital was always above the law, the office of the president in Wulan State was far less magnificent than the headquarters of the Qin clan in terms of area and environment. Qin Weiyun was not interested in everything in the office of the president. After following Qin Shilai to his temporary residence, the first thing she said was, "Sixth uncle, can I see His Highness Li Tianlan?" Qin Shilai, who was pouring water, paused for a moment, and then smiled without showing the slightest difference. "But, little girl, are you here with a task today? Was it a mission given to you by your family, or by your sister?" Qin Weiyun giggled and pretended to be stupid, trying to get away with it. "Tell me the truth." Qin Shilai touched Qin Weiyun's smooth forehead and said, "Don't pretend to be stupid. Tell me, what are you doing here?" "Nothing. I just want to see what His Highness Tianlan looks like and care about his injury." Qin Weiyun blinked her eyes and looked around. Qin Shilai looked at her with a smile and did not speak. Well, my fourth uncle and my sister asked me to come and have a look. Qin Weiyun struggled for a while, puffed up her mouth, and told the truth. Does your fourth uncle really believe the rumors outside? Qin Shilai frowned, and his tone was a little dissatisfied. There were also many branches within the Qin clan, but there were only him and his brother Qin Dongchao in the line of the patriarch. Qin Dongchao ranked 4th in this generation of the Qin clan, and Qin Shilai ranked 6th. Although they were brothers, Qin Shilai had never agreed with his brother Qin Dongchao's approach. Although the two brothers had the same standpoint, their relationship in private had always been relatively stiff. Because Qin Shilai was a pure swordsman. Everything about Qin Dongchao was in line with the image of a patriarch of a wealthy family. He was the kind of person who had been through conspiracies and plots, and finally became familiar with all the darkness. He was cold-blooded, tough, powerful, and self-interested. Although Qin Shilai did not like this brother, he also knew that the Qin clan needed such a patriarch to lead the way. Therefore, in the recent days when rumors were flying everywhere, especially when there were more and more speculations about Li Tianlan's injury and it was getting more and more serious, Qin Dongchao would naturally have doubts. However, Qin Shilai was still a little dissatisfied and even thought that Qin Dongchao was old and confused. Let alone other things, let alone how untrustworthy the rumors generated in the chaos were, even if Li Tianlan was really disabled, would the Lin clan and the Samsara Palace really give up? If they didn't give up, what was the point of letting Wei Yun determine Li Tianlan's state now? Fourth uncle must believe it. Qin Weiyun took a sip of water and laughed. Sixth uncle, some rumors were originally released by us. Qin Shilai was slightly stunned and subconsciously narrowed his eyes. We released them ourselves? Qin Weiyun nodded hard. Qin Shilai thought for a moment and suddenly said, You just said that it was your fourth uncle and your sister who asked you to come here? Which sister? A few years ago, Qin Weiyun was in danger when she was traveling in Western Europe. It was Qin Weibai who saved her and recognized her as her sworn sister. This was also the direct reason why the status of Qin Weiyun's family rose sharply in the Qin clan. Since then, Qin Weiyun had been talking about Qin Weibai all the time. But Qin Shilai suddenly thought that Qin Weibai was indeed Weiyun's sister, but this girl had more than one sister. Not to mention Qin Weibai, there were several sisters in the family. Qin Weiyun bit her lip and hesitated. Sister Qingyao. Qin Shilai understood in an instant. He was stunned and then didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Qin Qingyao. In terms of relationship, his relationship with Qin Qingyao was much closer than with Qin Weiyun. She was his niece and Qin Dongchao's biological daughter. Similarly, Qin Qingyao was also the heroine of some recent rumors. It was rumored that the Qin clan had taken a fancy to Li Tianlan's infinite potential in the future, so they planned to use Qin Qingyao to unite with Li Tianlan by marriage. At first, this rumor only spread on a small scale, but in the past few days, it had become more and more exaggerated. Qin Shilai was a little annoyed at first, but Qin Weiyun's words immediately made him understand what was going on. This rumor turned out to be released by the Qin clan itself. And his elder brother released such news. Was he testing the reaction of all parties or Li Tianlan's reaction? Qingyao is also willing? Qin Shilai shook his head slightly and said in a strange tone. Qin Qingyao was the eldest daughter of the younger generation of the Qin clan. Her appearance and temperament were impeccable. She was quiet and generous. She seemed to be gentle and approachable to everyone. However, as her uncle, he naturally knew how proud and arrogant his niece was. The Qin clan used Qin Qingyao to form a marriage alliance. There was no doubt that they had placed a heavy bet on Li Tianlan. However, the problem was, what kind of women were around Li Tianlan? Dongqing Rushi, who was as clear as water and amazingly talented, Wang Yuetong, the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai, and Qin Weibai, who was peerless and fairy-like. Qin Qingyao might not be inferior to the first two. But Qin Weibai was by Li Tianlan's side. How could his niece compare with her? Qin Shilai shook his head. Qingyao is proud and arrogant. Is this what she wants? Qin Weiyun held her cheeks, her eyes blurred, and said softly, Who doesn't want to? Qin Shilai wanted to say something, but he finally fell silent. Indeed. Who wouldn't want to? When Li Tianlan first entered the secular world, some people might pay attention to his identity, but no one would take him seriously. After the final battle of Heaven Capital, this kind of contempt was less. In the next 3 years, when the Dark World had forgotten him, he suddenly appeared and completely established his status as the Chosen One. In the chaos of Eastern Europe, he killed 2 invincible realm experts in a day. That year, Li Tianlan was only 22 years old. He was not a real invincible realm expert. No one could be sure how far Li Tianlan could go in the future, because the Chosen One was a legend. Today, the Wang family of Beihai was the best in the world, and the Sword Emperor was invincible in the world. But for the people of this era, who could imagine the initial glorious time of the Wang family of Beihai? This was a man who was destined to surpass Wang Tianzong if there was no accident. This was a man who was destined to be worth the investment of all the major forces. Such a Li Tianlan was worth any woman flying into the fire like a moth. Especially for ambitious and resourceful women, whether it was a goddess or a queen, when Li Tianlan set foot on the peak one day, he could completely support any woman's wild dream. Such a Li Tianlan was the most ideal husband in the eyes of all women. Who wouldn't want to? Qin Shilai thought for a long time. No matter how ambitious his niece was, in the face of such a man, he was afraid that she would not have the courage to refuse, right? Willingly? He suddenly thought of Qin Weibai and had a headache. So, Qin Yao agreed, so she asked you to come and have a look? Qin Shilai asked. Qin Weiyun chuckled and said, in fact, I also want to see this brother-in-law. I'm also curious that my 2 most outstanding sisters are willing to choose him as their husband. Qin Weiyun had several sisters, but there were only 2 who were the most outstanding. Qin Qingyao, who was related by blood. Qin Weibai, who was not related by blood. Qin Shilai took a deep breath, but he still felt a little depressed. 6th uncle, just let me have a look, okay? Qin Weiyun looked at Qin Shilai pitifully and said, how can I make the decision? Qin Shilai shook his head and said, I don't know how His Highness's injury is. Well, I'll take you to see Miss Dongqing later. Dongqing Rushi did not agree with Li Zonghu's plan to send troops in the end. This plan was indeed extremely vicious. It forced Wang Tianzong to have no way out, but it also cost too much. Such a cost, plus the risk that Li Tianlan would take, was real. Under such circumstances, Dongqing Rushi could not agree. In fact, what she wanted most was the safety of her man. She had accepted the idea of treating Li Tianlan as her husband since she was a child, and now this idea had completely become an instinct. As for the benefits obtained, compared with his safety, it was completely secondary. The meeting did not end on bad terms. But Li Zonghu was somewhat helpless. Li Wangxing was also helpless. It seems that there is no other way. Li Zonghu muttered and shook his head. In fact, your idea is good, but the safety of His Highness is indeed very important. I neglected it before. If we send out all our elites, His Highness will definitely be attacked. At that time, the situation will be even more difficult to clean up. When you told me this plan, you should have considered this, right? Did I? Li Wangxing said casually. Did I? Noticing that there was something wrong with his tone, Li Zonghu looked suspicious. Li Wangxing was slightly surprised and smiled. Of course there are arrangements. What arrangements? Li Zonghu's eyes lit up. Li Wangxing shook his head. But it's meaningless. Young madam doesn't agree, not only because of young master's safety, but also because she can't bear to give up the Snowdance Corps of more than 10,000 people. Li Wangxing scratched his head, suddenly turned around and said, I'm going to see His Highness. Li Wangxing watched his back leave, smiled, looked at the Prime Minister who was still sitting in the conference room, and said with a smile, Mr. Prime Minister, you've worked hard these days. Prime Minister Rieker shook his head, but he was a little flattered. He was in an extremely awkward situation now. In terms of status, he was the highest in Wulan State. But in the conference room, as Li Tianlan's dog, his status was the lowest. Li Zonghu, a rough man, had never taken him seriously. Even cool breeze and drifting cloud, no matter how kind they smiled all day, were full of a kind of cold, murderous intent. Only Dongqing Rushi and Li Wangsheng treated him as usual. They were not polite, but they maintained a kind of respect. He stood up subconsciously, hesitated for a moment, and said, "Did you tell General Li about this plan?" Li Wangsheng sighed helplessly, nodded, and said, "Yes." "What a pity." He shook his head. "There will be opportunities in the future. I believe we will win." Prime Minister Riker comforted him. Li Wangxing nodded. His appearance was relatively dull, so when he smiled, he was particularly sincere. "Please help me more in the future, Mr. Prime Minister." He bowed slightly. Prime Minister Riker also bowed subconsciously. Li Wangxing assisted him and said with a smile, "We are all on the same side. Why are you so polite?" The corner of Prime Minister Riker's mouth moved, and he finally laughed at himself. "You are on the same side as His Highness. But I am just a dog. How dare I not be polite? I know Mr. Prime Minister is a little uncomfortable." Li Wangxing shook his head and interrupted Riker's rebuttal. "But please keep faith in young master. The reputation of a running dog is not good. But young master is your master, isn't he also my master? We are all the same. Maybe one day, when young master reaches a high position, you will find that it is really not shameful to be a dog. The important thing is whose dog we are." He patted Prime Minister Riker on the shoulder, left the conference room, and returned to his room. His room was very close to Li Tianlan. This was Dongqing Rushi's subconscious arrangement. The Terracotta Army, Black Tortoise group led by him was scattered around, forming a core line of defense. Li Wangxing sat in his room and thought for a while. He took out his mobile phone and dialed a number. The phone was quickly connected. An elegant and soft voice sounded on the phone. "Madam, young madam refused your plan." Li Wangxing held the phone and said softly. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the phone. Then it turned out to be the voice of Bai Qingqian, the current leader of Guangdong Province in Zhongzhou State. "I was just going to inform you that Qin Weibai also refused my plan." Li Wangxing fell silent. The Dongqing clan was very obvious in the chaos of Eastern Europe, but Bai Qingqian's figure was extremely hidden, and this plan was so precise. Li Wangxing was very clear that if Dongqing Rushi agreed to Bai Qingqian's plan, then Bai Qingqian would definitely borrow enough power from Qin Weibai to protect young master. But Qin Weibai also refused her plan. This should be a rare thing for Bai Qingqian. Bai Qingqian was an extraordinary woman in the political circle of Zhongzhou State. She was graceful and luxurious, but only those who had really experienced her means knew how decisive and powerful this secretary Bai was. Before Bai Qingqian went to Guangdong, she was in charge of Qinzhou. In less than one term, she single-handedly got in. In 4 years, as the second-in-command, she forcibly incorporated the entire Qinzhou into the territory of the giant group. This alone was enough to show Bai Qingqian's means. Such a person would not do anything without absolute certainty. But when she had absolute certainty, she still miscalculated. But Li Wangxing couldn't help asking. Qin Weibai found him not long ago, and her means were extremely direct. She completely dispelled his doubts about Bai Qingqian with a phone call. It was a phone call from Li Honghe. He had no choice but to trust her. He did his best to cooperate, but in the end, this was the result. Li Wangxing couldn't tell how he felt. She said this is not what she wants. Bai Qingqian said softly. Li Wangxing was a little confused. Her original words were that Tianlan shouldn't seek self-protection under the general trend. It's no different from dragging out an ignoble life. What she wants to bring Tianlan is freedom. Bai Qingqian said. "I don't understand." Li Wangxing told the truth. He didn't understand Qin Weibai's crazy idea at all. "I don't understand either, but..." Bai Qingqian paused and laughed. "Let's wait and see." Li Wangxing silently hung up the phone. At the same time, Qin Shilai and Qin Weiyun also found Dongqing Rushi by the small fountain in front of Li Tianlan's residence. Dongqing Rushi was picking flowers in the flower bed next to the fountain. It seemed that she wanted to take them to the room. The rain in the sky evaporated automatically around her. The flowers in her hands were stained with a little rain. She and the flowers looked extremely delicate and tender. "Miss Dongqing," Qin Shilai called out. Dongqing Rushi turned around and nodded. "Mr. Qin. This is my niece, Qin Weiyun." Qin Shilai was a little embarrassed. He felt as if he was helping his own family poach. He felt very uncomfortable. "I'm here to visit His Highness's injury on behalf of the Qin family. I don't know if it's convenient." Dongqing Rushi glanced at Qin Weiyun and blinked. Qin Weiyun also blinked. She seemed innocent, but after all, she was not experienced in the world. There was a kind of subconscious hostility in her eyes. In her eyes, Dongqing Rushi was the one who robbed her two sisters of a man. She was really annoying. Dongqing Rushi was very sensitive to Qin Weibai's hostility. She frowned with some confusion and said in a clear voice, "Why are you looking at me?" Qin Weiyun was stunned. Then she smiled sweetly and said obediently, "Sister, you are very beautiful." Dongqing Rushi said in a clear voice, "You don't have to go to see Tunlun. He won't like you." Qin Shilai, who looked embarrassed, coughed hard and said with a bitter smile, "Miss Dongqing, don't get me wrong. Weiyun didn't mean that." Qin Weiyun's little face turned red. She glared at Dongqing Rushi and then at Qin Shilai. Qin Shilai really couldn't understand these subtle women's thoughts. He touched his nose, looked at Dongqing Rushi and said, "I don't know if it's convenient for us to go in." Dongqing Rushi thought for a moment and nodded. She walked to the door with the flowers, opened the door, and walked in. "I'll tidy up first." "Wait a moment," Dongqing Rushi said. These days, Li Tianlan was in a coma. In order to take care of him, she had been living with Li Tianlan. Of course, she had to tidy up some girls' personal clothes. Qin Shilai nodded with a smile and said, "Yes, yes." Dongqing Rushi slowly went upstairs. There was only one master bedroom in the building, which was extremely spacious. Dongqing Rushi pushed the door open and suddenly froze. Li Tianlan, who had been in a coma for 10 days, had opened his eyes and was sitting on the bed, motionless. He was not in a daze because he was not awake. At this moment, Li Tianlan seemed to be completely lost in thought. He sat there, looking incomparably deep and profound. Chapter 475. Dongqing Rushi blinked her eyes. She didn't think that she was hallucinating, but Li Tianlan in her sight did give her a strange feeling. Li Tianlan, who was sitting quietly on the bed, was extremely quiet. It seemed to be a kind of quietness that completely settled all emotions from the inside out. It was not the indifference and calmness after going through a storm, but the purest quietness. He was as quiet as a rock, but he seemed extremely illusory. In this state, Li Tianlan was like a shadow that would be blown away by the wind at any time, illusory and clear. He didn't seem to notice Dongqing Rushi coming in at all. He opened his eyes and stared at the huge vase in the bedroom without blinking, silent. His eyes were very focused. But there seemed to be a vast expanse of fog in his eyes, vague and blurred. Dongqing Rushi suddenly felt that Li Tianlan was very scary now. She couldn't tell what was scary, but a kind of instinctive fear gradually occupied her consciousness, even covering her surprise when she saw Li Tianlan wake up. She hesitated and said in a very low voice, "You're awake?" Li Tianlan turned his head and glanced at her. The fog in his eyes dissipated, and he became extremely calm. "How many days have I slept?" he asked. "It's the 10th day." Dongqing Rushi gradually calmed down. She walked over and sat beside him, reaching out and holding Li Tianlan's hand. Li Tianlan frowned slightly, but he didn't ask about the situation outside. He just said casually, "Have you been living here these days?" His bed was very big. The first time he woke up, Li Tianlan found that there was a place for another person next to him. The big bed was surrounded by the fragrance of Dongqing Rushi. "Yes, it's convenient for me to take care of you." Dongqing Rushi blushed and whispered, "Did I squeeze you when I was sleeping?" Li Tianlan smiled, touched Dongqing Rushi's hair, and stood up. "I'll take a shower," he said. Dongqing Rushi nodded and thought of the guests downstairs. "Mr. Qin is still downstairs." Li Tianlan said. Then I'll hurry up. He took a set of pajamas and walked to the bathroom, his pace steady and calm. Dongqing Rushi looked at his back, and there was a little disbelief in her puzzled eyes. At present, she was probably the only one in the entire dark world who knew Li Tianlan's secret. During the 10 days when he was in a coma, Dongqing Rushi didn't let anyone get close to Li Tianlan. To some extent, it was to protect Li Tianlan's secret. Great changes took place in Wulan State in one day. Li Tianlan's injury was unimaginably serious. But what was inconceivable was that the speed of his recovery was also unimaginably fast. Almost every day or even every moment, Li Tianlan, who was in a coma, was getting better. How much would Li Tianlan pay to kill 2 invincible realm experts in a row? But such a serious injury didn't seem to affect his foundation at all. The injury, which could be fatal to any expert of the half-step invincible realm, was healing at a stunning speed for Li Tianlan. It was a miracle. Dongqing Rushi thought for a while. She didn't understand why, but she was happy to see Li Tianlan's injury getting better. The sound of running water could be heard from the bathroom. Dongqing Rushi stood up, took out a brand new Xianxia state military uniform from the wardrobe, and carefully put the military rank on it. She placed the military uniform on the bed and looked at it for a while before nodding in satisfaction. Eastern Europe was getting colder and colder. In the almost freezing weather, the cold water sprinkled on the body, with a kind of coolness that almost soaked the body. The depression after waking up from a dream was swept away in the cold water. Li Tianlan closed his eyes and began to check his injuries for the first time. All the wounds had completely healed, and even the scars began to fade. The seriously injured internal organs had almost completely recovered, and the exhausted physical strength had also returned to its peak state. In general, Li Tianlan's injuries were almost completely healed. This was something that even he couldn't figure out. And what he couldn't figure out, he could only attribute it to the dragon vein. A large amount of luck gathered in him by the dragon vein was enough to heal all his injuries in the shortest time. Now Li Tianlan could be said to have returned to his peak state, but the only thing that troubled him was his dual wind and thunder veins. Twice the strength and speed of ordinary wind and thunder veins, such a heaven-defying congenital condition was truly perfect. Dual wind and thunder veins were the foundation, and perfect swordsmanship combined with strong enough willpower. Under such conditions, once he entered the invincible realm one day, he was confident that he could defeat most of the invincible realm experts on the divine list without even needing to stabilize his realm. But in the battle in Eastern Europe, half of his dual wind and thunder veins had been destroyed. Now the dual wind and thunder veins were still there, but after most of the injuries had almost healed, he could still sense that one of the veins in his body was still intermittent and useless. Li Tianlan's mood was a little complicated. He clearly remembered that he couldn't throw a punch in the battle with Xianxia that day. When his strength, speed, martial arts, and willpower were all perfect, they were not concentrated but scattered. He had no weaknesses, so they became his biggest weakness. This was bound to be a problem that troubled him for a long time. Now half of the dual wind and thunder veins had been destroyed. From a practical point of view, his strength and speed were no longer perfect. But in this state, Li Tianlan could be calmer and could even exert a slightly stronger combat capability than in a perfect state. This seemed like a good thing. But there were two sides to everything. In an imperfect state, Li Tianlan would be stronger. But imperfection was not the limit. And Li Tianlan's martial arts was the pursuit of the limit. There must be problems with the limit. Even if these problems could not be solved by Li Tianlan for the time being, how could he be willing to give up? The most important thing was that with half of the dual wind and thunder veins temporarily destroyed, Li Tianlan's conditions were not perfect, so there was no so-called limit state. In fact, there was one thing that no one knew. When he faced Xianxia and forced him into a desperate situation, he and Fireman, Cool Breeze, Drifting Cloud, and the two sword masters of Yin-Yang Phantom jointly resisted the move of living with heaven and earth. But if Fireman and others were not there at that time, Li Tianlan had no choice but to face Xianxia, who had fought desperately to the limit, and he was also sure to kill him. As long as he dared to pay the price. And the price he had to pay was not his foundation, but his sword in the limit state. When fighting with others, Li Tianlan could start with the eternal silence of mountains and rivers. This was all because the eternal silence of mountains and rivers was the starting move in his kendo. Originally, Li Tianlan wanted to leave this sword in the limit state to the last, but he did not expect that just at the beginning his limit state had completely disappeared. At least before his dual wind and thunder veins were fully restored, this sword would not come out. This was equivalent to abolishing the strongest card in his hand. The cold water washed Li Tianlan's body. Li Tianlan's expression was calm. But the waves and confusion in his heart did not stop for a moment. When he came back to his senses from his own thoughts, nearly an hour had passed. Li Tianlan was shocked and suddenly remembered that Dongqing Rushi said that Qin Shilai was still waiting downstairs. He shook his head, dried himself as quickly as possible, and walked out of the bathroom in a bathrobe. Dongqing Rushi was still in bed, but she was not sitting. She had fallen asleep. Her body was gently curled up. She was dressed, breathing steadily, and there was no defense at all. Li Tianlan walked over and quietly picked up the military uniform she had prepared for him. Dongqing Rushi's body moved. Go to sleep first. I'll go down and have a look. Li Tianlan touched her face. Her face was very white and tender, but it looked a little haggard. Li Tianlan looked at her quietly for a while. He had been in a coma for 10 days. During these 10 days, he did not know how long the woman in front of him had rested. If she had had a good rest, how could she have slept so deeply when she was relaxed at this time? Dongqing Rushi unconsciously rubbed Li Tianlan's palm with her face and turned over. Li Tianlan covered her with the quilt, put on the military uniform that symbolized power in both Zhongzhou state and Wulan state, and slowly walked out. There was a slight chatter downstairs, as if someone was whispering, and the voice was very low. Li Tianlan could only hear some words about his sister, brother-in-law, and the Qin clan. He adjusted the buttons of his cuffs, walked down the stairs, and said with a chuckle, "Sorry to keep you waiting, Mr. Qin." Qin Shilai, who was thinking about something, subconsciously shook his head. Suddenly he realized that something was wrong and stood up abruptly. Li Tianlan waved his hand casually and said with a smile, "You're welcome, sir. Please sit down." Do. Qin Shilai took a deep breath. He stared at Li Tianlan with an undisguised shock in his eyes. Recently, there were more and more rumors about Li Tianlan's injury in the outside world. To be honest, Qin Shilai naturally did not believe the rumor that Li Tianlan's foundation had been destroyed. But Qin Shilai was not optimistic about Li Tianlan's injury. He knew very well how difficult it was for Li Tianlan that day. With such an injury, Qin Shilai asked himself that if he were Li Tianlan, it would take at least 3 months to recover to a certain extent. If he wanted to recover, it would take at least half a year. But how long had it been now? Li Tianlan not only woke up, but his essence, qi, and spirit faintly felt that he had returned to the peak. The injury was close to recovery, but it was not complete. Therefore, Li Tianlan could not control his aura very well. But it was because of the sword intent that he revealed intentionally or unintentionally that Qin Shilai was sure of the degree of his recovery. Li Tianlan might not have recovered from his injury now, but compared with a real recovery, there seemed to be no specific difference. How was this possible? Your Highness, your injury. Qin Shilai was so excited that he couldn't say much for a while. The injury is fine. I feel much better after sleeping, Li Tianlan said softly. The dragon vein was the vitality. He alone carried the vitality of a country, and the two complemented each other. As long as Li Tianlan did not suffer the kind of injury that could kill him in an instant, no matter how serious his injury was in the future, his recovery speed would not be too slow. Qin Shilai took a deep breath and suddenly shook his head, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. I remember the rumors in the outside world. Recently, the outside world has been saying that your Highness's injury is too serious, and even your foundation has been destroyed. If you go out now, I really don't know what the expressions of those who spread the rumors will be. My foundation has been destroyed, Li Tianlan repeated and shook his head subconsciously. Only those who were expected to enter the invincible realm were qualified to talk about the foundation. Anyone who could enter the invincible realm could be said to be a genius. How could the martial arts foundation of a genius be easily destroyed? Li Tianlan had only heard of 2 people whose foundation had been destroyed in the invincible realm. One was Summer Solstice, the hostess of the Wang family of Beihai. Summer Solstice broke through to the invincible realm that year. Although her combat capability directly soared to the peak of the invincible realm, her realm was unstable. Li Guangtu was no worse than Summer Solstice. With the murderous weapon Infinite Sky, he barely caused this result with a full blow. He himself was at the peak of the invincible realm. Infinite Sky also exerted its greatest power, which was equivalent to the full attack of 2 experts at the peak of the invincible realm at the same time, and barely destroyed Summer Solstice. As a result, not to mention the collapse of Infinite Sky, Li Guangtu would also be seriously injured. This was to deal with Summer Solstice, whose realm was unstable at that time. Defeating an invincible realm expert and destroying an invincible realm expert were 2 completely different concepts. As for the second one, it was naturally his grandfather, Li Honghe. This was something that had just happened. But Li Honghe was in his 80s this year, and his foundation had been loose. It was normal for him to fall from the invincible realm after taking Wang Tianzong's break of reincarnation. Even without that sword stroke, Li Honghe's strength could not always be in the invincible realm. The foundation was everything of a martial artist. It was absolutely extremely difficult to destroy the foundation of a martial artist. As for Li Tianlan, his martial arts was now perfect, and his foundation was as stable as Mount Tai. Under such circumstances, unless he died, his foundation could not be threatened at all. No matter how serious the injury was, it was impossible to hurt his foundation. It's ridiculous. Li Tianlan shook his head and suddenly narrowed his eyes. Sir, did you just say that this is a rumor? Qin Shilai nodded. Where did the rumor come from? The warmth in Li Tianlan's eyes seemed to be gradually disappearing. Who knows? Every force may spread such rumors, and they also have such motives. Qin Shilai said. Li Tianlan nodded. He was silent for a while and suddenly laughed. It seems that Reki City has been very lively recently. Qin Weiyun had been watching Li Tianlan curiously. The youngest legend in the Dark World, the future king, looked neither tall nor handsome, but his every move carried an indescribable style. It was a flavor that was completely combined with power, force, status, and the halo of the Chosen One. It was hard to describe. Qin Weiyun was thinking about how to describe it so that she could go back and report it, and then she heard Li Tianlan's words. It seemed that Reki City had been very lively recently. This sentence was very light. Li Tianlan's smile was also very peaceful. But in an instant, Qin Weiyun suddenly felt an unprecedented coldness. A kind of faint killing intent seemed to fill the world in an instant. It was illusory, but it was extremely real. Qin Weiyun's scalp was a little numb. She had wanted to speak, but at this time, she could not help calling him sixth uncle. Her voice was very low. But Qin Shilai suddenly reacted and said with a smile, Your Highness, I forgot to introduce you. This is my little niece. The faintly discernible killing intent suddenly disappeared. Li Tianlan glanced at Qin Weiyun, nodded and said calmly, Hello. Qin Weiyun forced a smile and said softly, Your Highness, I'm Qin Weiyun. She had wanted to call him brother-in-law as a joke. But at this moment she no longer had that kind of courage. Li Tianlan suddenly said yes, looked at Qin Weiyun, and then looked at Qin Shilai. His body slowly relaxed, and he leaned against the sofa. Boss Qin is Weiyun's sister. Qin Shilai explained with a smile, It's just a coincidence that this name is a bit of a coincidence. In fact, Boss Qin has no blood relationship with the Qin clan. She is a partner of the Qin clan. Well, this is also because of Weiyun. Li Tianlan felt that something was wrong, but he could not tell what was wrong. He nodded subconsciously and suddenly said with a smile, How did you and Little Bai meet? Qin Weiyun's face was still a little pale, but she subconsciously wanted to say a few more words to her brother-in-law. Hearing this, she did not think too much and whispered, A few years ago, I met her when I traveled to England. Go on. Li Tianlan smiled. Qin Weiyun seemed to gradually regain her composure. She said with a smile, "It's nothing. At that time, our family had a very difficult opponent in England. She was a famous devil in Europe. She heard that I was a member of the Qin family and wanted to kill me. Then my sister sent someone to kill her. Finally, she recognized me as her sister, and—" Qin Weiyun's voice suddenly paused. She seemed to realize that she had said something she shouldn't have said. Her face instantly turned pale, and she shut up in a panic. She refused to say another word. When King Tong hurriedly pushed open the door of Wang Tianzong's room and broke in, Wang Tianzong was video-chatting with Summer Solstice. Summer Solstice's figure appeared on the big screen high above. Looking at King Tong, she seemed to be really condescending. King Tong had never liked Summer Solstice. Summer Solstice didn't like King Tong very much either. So seeing this scene, King Tong's face changed. She snorted coldly and subconsciously wanted to turn around and leave. But as soon as she turned around, her body stopped in place. Wang Tianzong looked at her in surprise. Summer Solstice was even more surprised. Her eyes stopped on the folder in King Tong's hand, and then she smiled calmly. "You guys talk first. I'll hang up." The screen went black. Summer Solstice's figure disappeared from the screen. King Tong's face was a little ugly, but she forced herself to endure it. "Urgent?" Wang Tianzong asked. He knew King Tong's character very well. Based on her character, if it wasn't a real emergency, she would definitely turn around and leave the moment she saw Summer Solstice. Now she was standing where she was. This kind of compromise was not easy, and it also meant that the matter was extremely urgent. King Tong took a deep breath. Thinking of the news she had just received, her face suddenly changed again. "You should see this." She handed the information in her hand to Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong took the folder in his hand and opened it to glance at it. It was the information of a family. The Taylor family? Wang Tianzong glanced at King Tong. He felt that this family was a little strange, but also a little familiar. After thinking for a while, he said uncertainly, "The Taylor family of Fog City?" King Tong nodded with a solemn expression. Wang Tianzong was a little confused, but he didn't ask much. In his impression, the Taylor family could barely be regarded as a second-rate wealthy family in Europe. It was not weak in England, but England was the strongest base camp of Rothschild. The Wang family of Beihai had a very close relationship with Rothschild, so Wang Tianzong naturally would not pay attention to the Taylor family. But this family, why did the more he thought about it, the more familiar it was? The information showed the information of some important members of the Taylor family in recent years. Wang Tianzong frowned and suddenly said, "This family? I seem to have heard of it somewhere in the past few years." "No, I just heard about it from Xianming recently." "Haven't you thought of it yet?" King Tong's voice was a little hollow. "Some time ago, you asked Xianming to investigate Qin Weibai." Wang Tianzong's palm froze slightly. He raised his head and looked at King Tong. He finally remembered where he had heard the name of the Taylor family. When the name Qin Weibai first appeared in the eyes of the dark world, it was at the annual meeting of the Taylor family. Wang Tianzong frowned tightly. "I've only just received this information as well." King Tong managed to suppress her fluctuating thoughts. "And I have confirmed it. If I'm not wrong, there is a 90% chance that the Taylor family is an important part of the Samsara Palace." "What does this mean?" Wang Tianzong simply put down the information in his hand. "Do you remember who the master of Samsara Palace killed for the only time in England a few years ago?" King Tong asked. "The witch?" Wang Tianzong said a name. "Yes, the witch, a famous devil in the half-step invincible realm in Europe in recent years. She had a deep conflict with the Qin clan, so she fled from Eastern Europe to Western Europe." King Tong said slowly, "A few years ago, the witch had her eyes on an Asian girl. The master of Samsara Palace happened to meet her, killed the witch, and recognized the girl she saved as her sworn sister." Wang Tianzong nodded and said yes. "From then on, Qin Weibai came into our sight. We have been investigating the relationship between Qin Weibai and the Qin clan, and we have come to the conclusion that Qin Weibai has nothing to do with the Qin clan." King Tong continued. Is it wrong? Wang Tianzong frowned. Yes and no. King Tong suddenly became excited. Because the sworn sister saved by the master of Samsara Palace was not Qin Weibai at all. It's just that the annual meeting of the Tylo family is not very influential, and the Tylo group deliberately confuses people, so the girl became Qin Weibai. She pointed to the information beside Wang Tianzong. At that time, the witch did not target Qin Weibai. The girl she targeted was called Qin Weiyun. She was a member of the Qin clan in Eastern Europe. Half of these materials are evidence. Wang Tianzong's pupils suddenly contracted. Really? His whole spirit seemed to be condensed in an instant. King Tong looked at Wang Tianzong with complicated eyes and nodded. This is Rothschild's mistake. It's not until today that we know the truth. The most ridiculous thing is that we know the truth because of an external material. Wang Tianzong was silent for a long time. The wild rain outside swept the whole city. The whole city was filled with ice. Wang Tianzong looked at the information in front of him and was lost in thought. When Qin Weibai appeared in the Dark World for the first time, she was in England. In order to save her, the master of Samsara Palace killed the witch and the witch in Europe. Then she recognized Qin Weibai as her sworn sister. Later, Qin Weibai became the second person who could represent the will of Samsara Palace, only under the palace master. This was the consensus of the Dark World. But this consensus was now completely overturned. All the information about Qin Weibai seemed to be messed up that night. The master of Samsara Palace did not save Qin Weibai that year. She saved Qin Weiyun. Then, where did Qin Weibai come from? Peek. You're tuning in to the Wandering Hero YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.